we get outside, when we get to the horses, just remember one thing. Hey, wait a minute. What? You didn't see LeFors out there, did you? LeFors? No. Oh, good. For a moment there, I thought we were in trouble.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where this week we are continuing our exploration of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. My name is Steve Morris. I am a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Rocha. I'm a writer, producer, and host here in San Diego, California, a voiceover artist as well, and excited to be putting my cowboy hat on, which I rarely get to put on nowadays, and walk back into a Western for this second part of our conversation of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Steve. Really excited to see what happens to our two outlaws as they get away from this, try to get away from this super posse.
Well, and with an outlaw leading it, I think, how can this go wrong? And I got to say, it's really funny because editing the show with you leading the last one,
yeah,
we talked about this all the time of like, how do we change it up? How do we make the cine? Because I think even though I'm super proud of the Cine-Files and how we've done it over the years, I never ever want to get stagnant or stuck. Right. And as I was editing, I was like, oh, I have to edit this differently because you lead it slightly differently, because your tone is the rhythms are slightly differently. And all of that made the show come out, I thought, really, really well. So I'm really excited to get on to part 2 and see where we're going to end up.
Absolutely. And before Steve and I grab a gun belt and jump off the cliff, we just want to remind you all that, the Cine-Files is such a important part of our lives, and we know that a lot of you support us and uplift our show in so many ways. The ways you can do that for those of you considering supporting us who are maybe newer to the show and don't know about this. We have a patreon.com/the Cine-Files where you can go and check it out with multiple tiers there, Steve, multiple benefits. We've been doing great advisory board meetings, the shorts, all kinds of stuff, the watch-alongs, the conversations of that nature. We've done so much over the last few years to get people excited to be supporting us here on the Cine-Files. So thank you so much to everyone who's doing that as well.
Well, and we've had people ask us, well, what goes on at these advisory board meetings? And of course, one of the things that happens is we're charting the future of the Cine-Files and discussing what will be our holiday movie or what will be our Halloween movie or what are the things that we've missed or what would you most like to see. That's the primary job. Yeah. But we also have great discussions about film, and we frequently start with a question. Now, I wanted to just share, this is the question we are going to be discussing at this week's advisory board, which is, if you could bring a great director from the past into today's world and have them direct a film or a character within one of the most popular genres, who would it be? Would you bring David Lean back to do the next Deadpool movie? Do you want Akira Kurosawa doing a space opera in Star Wars? Ooh. What would you want? And that is the question we're going to be discussing at the August advisory board very, very soon after we air this episode. So if you want to join it, this is your chance. If you have a great answer, go to patreon.com/the Cine-Files, join at the advisory board level, and we cannot wait to see you at our next meeting.
Absolutely. And for those who listen to our ads, another way you can support the show is definitely patronizing the ads there, using our codes. We support everything every ad, every sponsor that sponsors our podcast. We stand behind their products. So please go and if any of those stand out to you and you want to use them, use our code and sign up for them so they come on back and keep supporting us here on the Cine-Files, especially Fiji Water and Roundhouse Provisions. So many great new people, great new sponsors there for the show. All right, Steve, are you ready to jump in, or do you want to have any intro conversation before we go?
I want to get the hell away from the super posse. I don't know who those guys are, but they seem really scary.
Exactly. Who are those guys? Anyway, all right, let's jump in here. When last we left Butch and Sundance, they were being chased by the super posse, as we just said. And as we resumed the movie, they are riding fast over these hills, plains, and valleys, trying to escape this super posse, who were not fooled by them trying to separate out with those two other members of the Hole in the Wall gang. By the way, quick little trivia. Paul Newman's charity for kids for many years was called the Hole in the Wall Gang. So that's a pretty awesome hole in the wall kind of reference there for real life connections for sure. And they end up back at the brothel that we had seen earlier in the movie, where we hear Sundance telling the employees to put their horses in the back and feed them and keep them out of sight. as Butch comes running up the steps looking for someone named Sweetface. Now, Steve, at this point, did you think this was one of the ladies, one of the prostitutes, or did you know Sweetface was going to be a curmudgeonly old dude with a sweet face?
It's so funny because this is where, having watched the movie a million times, and particularly in my childhood, it never occurred to me that it was anything other than Sweetface because I've seen the movie so much.
Yeah.
But what I think is so interesting about this scene is the last time there was a posse, they were literally sitting in the brothel right above the posse, just looking and laughing at the situation.
Yeah.
And so we kind of go like, oh, they've made it back to home base. I guess they're going to be fine because they've done this before and they are so cool. And that is not the direction that we're going to go.
Not at all. I mean, he turns a corner, Butch does, and we hear him say to someone,
Get yourself out front fast. Seen us ride through town not 5 minutes ago. You do this right, I'll get you an old dog to kick.
and we see this old man come around the corner, this little old dude, almost Mickey Rooney-esque little old dude, come around the corner, gets sent down the stairs, and Butch selects a young blonde woman to have sex with in the room. We cut to this room with Butch and this woman in bed together as Sundance looks out the window.
Now, how can I give Agnes the concentration she deserves with you sticking your nose out the window like that?
Now, Steve, did you recognize the young blonde prostitute here named Agnes?
It's so funny because I literally went, wait, who is that? and I was like, that seems like somebody. And then I went, well, John's leading this one. He's taken over the name, so I don't have to look it up. And I was about to, and then I went, wait, who is that? And so, yes, I didn't recognize her right away.
Yeah.
I think she looks beautiful, but I did look her up. And so I am aware of who this person is.
That's right. It is the young Cloris Leachman. So doing one of her first movie roles here in this. She had been a TV actress for quite some time and then jumped into this as one of the first kind of notable roles as she starts to build her I'm going to say this, her resume through the 70s and 80s, and of course, all the way for the rest of her time on this planet. So we hear the posse ride up and Sundance calls Butch over.
Butch.
They watch Sweetface interact with the posse from the room. So we're watching it from the room and he sends the posse in the other direction. So problem solved, Steve. Then Butch gets ready to have sex with Agnes as Sundance hilariously says,
No. Don't ask me to stay.
and as Butch goes to bed, Agnes, this is such an interesting sequence. And again, this is why a fantastic writer like William Goldman deserves all the love and credibility that he gets for the amazing scripts he's written. All of a sudden, we get this weird kind of exchange or soliloquy where Agnes kind of goes into herself and starts talking how Butch is really the only real man he's ever met, and how he's so considerate of her. She's doing all of this as she undresses, and she's saying all of this sweet stuff about him and how good he is to her and all this stuff. And then just as we're maybe going to dial into this relationship and dial into this sequence or this sexual situation, we hear the posse ride back up with much more force. Sundance bursts into the room, walks over the bed in between Agnes and Butch, who Agnes just keeps talking, by the way, and Butch and Sundance go to the window. They watch the posse threaten Sweetface, who immediately sells them out, points to the window. And I love that George Roy Hill does a close-up, or the editor does a close-up in there, and then Butch and Sundance take off out back to the horses. Steve, he trusted a thief. What did you expect?
Well, I don't know that Sweetface is a thief.
Well, he said that, didn't he say?
Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe
you're
you're
a
right.
lying thief, and so do you. That's what
It's perfect storytelling, and the use of that zoom onto Sweetface is just so great and it all just times out so perfectly in like, oh, I get what's going on. It's great.
Yeah. Well, that's the end of the Agnes situation here, Steve. Butch and Sundance take off out the back to their horses. Sundance is set upon by one of the members of the posse in this alley, but Butch jumps on the guy from up top and Sundance punches his lights out. Sundance goes to grab the horses and bring them back to Butch, who has untied the posse's horses and is trying to get them to take off to no avail.
You're the fat-headed beast. Quit shouting. Boy, somebody sure trained him.
I think what they do so perfectly is by ramping up in stages what is going to become, who are these guys?
Yes.
Is that because you have the small train and the whistle and them erupting out of the car. And you're like, wow, that's impressive. And then you have the moment where they're mid-gallop, killing members of the Hole in the Wall gang. Then you have the moment where they split up and don't get fooled by the split up.
Yeah.
Then you have them getting sweet face. And now you get to the horses that are so brilliantly trained that even slapping them on the behind does not get them to move.
Yeah.
And even though the sentence hasn't been uttered yet in this film, the audience is going, who are those guys?
Yeah. To me, the visual this brings up, and it's an excellent point you just said, Steve. This is the slow realization that their tactics, their methods that they've used to get away in the past, none of that is working. And slowly but surely, their tactics get blown up or found out or immediately overcome by this posse. It's the inevitability of time. That's what this posse is representing, the inevitability of progress. And so what you're seeing is these two guys essentially are stuck on an island or stuck floating on a piece of wood. And step by step, sharks are coming up to take pieces of the wood off, where they eventually are going to have to slide into the water or make a decision to dive into the shark-infested waters, right?
It's you've just created it's the old man and the super posse.
Basically.
Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Super Posse is what we're about to deal with.
All right, so we cut to them riding off into the night and into the dawn.
Which way? It doesn't matter. I don't know where we've been, and I've just been there. They can't follow us. We're safe. Really think so? I will if you will.
So I love this because this is Sundance essentially handing control over to Butch, and Butch doing his best with his brains to try to troubleshoot this situation. And it's very clear that even Butch doesn't trust himself to he's slowly realizing he can't even trust himself to troubleshoot himself out of this situation. So,
I mean, I don't even know where I've been, and I've been there. Like, what's so great, because in actuality, throughout this entire sequence, Butch has really good ideas.
Yeah. Yep.
Sweet face should have worked. Splitting up should have worked. There's a whole bunch of things later on that seem like they should work, and none of them work. And I said it in the last part. I love this relationship, and I love Sundance's just puts his trust in Butch because he knows that, and also knowing Butch's flaws and Butch knowing his own flaws. Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, and this is interesting too because like you see that very clearly. There are two distinct paths that are being laid out, right? Butch is clearly being relied upon to come up with the way for them to get out of there. Sundance just wants to kind of hand over control to Butch so that he can ride along and be able to shoot who he needs to shoot or escape this in some way and then wait upon the posse to come nearer to them. But like from the moment the posse comes off the train, this film becomes a chase film until the end of the movie. Even with the montages, even with the interludes, the inevitability of this posse never really leaves the feeling of the movie. And it becomes almost like Mad Max Fury Road, right? Mad Max Fury Road, there's like this beginning where you're getting to see everybody and what the world's going on. You're getting introduced to the main characters and who the people are. And then once they get on that rig, the entire movie is a chase sequence, essentially with pauses to experience things or connect with people and realize things. But essentially, it is a constant chase with pauses in between. So that's what I was realizing as I was rewatching the movie again for our conversation.
That's a really interesting way to think about it, and it's kind of a psychological.
Yes.
Because we establish that they are established and safe, whether it's in the hole in the wall gang, safe in the brothel, safe in all of their, they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then from this point forward, they are not safe. They will never be safe again.
They're never safe again. Even the illusion of safety eventually eludes them when we get to Bolivia.
How long you figure we've been watching?
Oh, wow.
How long before you figure they're not after us?
A while longer.
How come you're so talkative?
Naturally blabby, I guess.
So, Steve, these sequences are happening throughout these chasings. It is kind of a deft way to give us more character development about their relationship and who they are as people, don't you think?
Just naturally blabby, I guess, is such a... What I love about the line is there's two possibilities, I would say.
Yeah.
Like if I were the director or talking to actors about beat work, one possibility is because first of all, Sundance is not a blabby person.
No.
That is not definitely not true.
Yeah.
So the two possibilities for Redford are he knows that he's not a blabby person and he's saying this ironically.
Yes.
Or he actually isn't self-aware enough to realize he's not a blabby person and is saying it seriously in response to Butch's. And I've watched this movie dozen times and I cannot decide which one it is.
I think both of them work because we're clearly seeing Butch becoming more and more agitated, right? And so he's putting that off on Sundance. He's asking Sundance, how long before you figure? What do you think? And it's supposed to be Butch who's the brains of the outfit.
Right.
So you see him slowly kind of starting
He's
to realize.
panicking. Yeah.
Yeah. He's kind of spinning out. And so maybe this is the most Sundance has ever talked in a consecutive amount of time with Butch. So maybe he's being serious about the blabby thing, but I think more than likely he's being sarcastic to try to ease the tension that they're both feeling. But both could work. The framing here is great, Steve. I wanted to point this out. Butch in the foreground, Sundance in the back. It's just directors, and you know this, Steve, as a director yourself, where you put your main characters in the frame is so important to convey the mood of a scene, right? And seeing Sundance in the back there, much full body, and seeing Butch's face there, you can see the stress and the frustration and the fear that is going on slowly but surely across his face as the situation gets more and more dire for them.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, they think they see something, torches or lanterns following their path.
I couldn't do that. Could you do that? How can they do that?
Again, he is asking Sundance for verification, but he doesn't even wait for Sundance to respond.
Who are those guys?
It's so funny, and it's a refrain that's just going to get better and better. And I think, who are those guys is just entered the lexicon. You know what I mean? Like it is, we're going to need a bigger boat. It's one of those phrases that's just always there for us.
Right. And I think the great part of this, even though we do hear the names of the people in the posse, we never really, they're very clearly this inevitability, this shadowy, faceless inevitability that is coming for them, right? Essentially, the modernization coming for the Old West, so to speak.
You sure this will work?
It'll work.
Yeah, that's what you said about Sweetface. This'll work.
And then we see Sundance jump on Butch's horse. So I guess they think they can fool them again by trying to divide the horses, Steve, by sending the horses one way while they ride off into with the other horse.
It's a great stunt, by the way. I don't know how hard it is to leap from one galloping horse or cantering horse to another one, but that's pretty impressive and pretty cool. And by the way, I feel real bad for this horse. I mean, obviously movies are not realistic and Western movies are not real. Like horses, they actually cannot run forever. They have to be rested and walked and cooled down.
Yeah.
The horse that has two riders on it, it seems as if it's just galloping for the next 48 straight hours or something. That is one tired horse.
Absolutely. As we saw at the end of the remake of True Grit, how the horse gives out. How Blackie gives out there, which is an episode we did years ago, so you guys can listen to that one as well. They watch the posse get to where they split up and take the bait initially, and just as Sundance himself is maybe trying to figure out how they do it, he sees that the posse has figured out their trick, and now he asks,
"Who are those guys?" I don't know.
Well, we got to do something and shake them. Whatever it is that you come up with is fine with me, but whatever it is that you come up with, it better be now.
And I put here, if even Sundance is rattled, this is an issue.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, there's such a building of tension. And what I like, and this is also something you see throughout the entire movie, is it's always fun. You know what I mean? Like as serious, even at the end of the movie, when it's as serious can be. Yeah. They're still fun to be with, these guys.
I mean, there's look, I don't want to get in too deep into the themes and the symbolism here, but this is life. This is not even it's not even modernization to Old West. This is being young and trying to hold on to being young until the last possible moment before you have to adult. This is Pan before he has to go back and be an adult again. This is those moments in life where the inevitability of adulting, and so many of the people listening to me, and Steve, you and I have experienced it in our own lives, sometimes we just want to hold on to that little bit of youth, that last bit of rebellion or what have you, or outlawish, shall I say. But eventually the real world does catch up with you, and you've got to play a hand, and you've got to settle down a little bit and be an adult and handle your business, or else there's real consequences for that in life.
I mean, what was the conversation we were having off mic? I was talking about my son and his school and how he needs more discipline. And my son is not living in, and I never thought about this as a metaphor in Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, but it's obviously there about adulthood and that you can get away with it, whatever it is, for a certain amount of time in your life.
Yeah.
But eventually it is going to catch up to you. Yeah. And it is the super posse. You know, exactly. I never thought about it that way, but you're totally right.
So we cut to a close-up of the inside of a sheriff's office with a sign that reads, Office of the Sheriff of Carbon County. Carbon County.
What the hell do you mean, take it easy? You promised me you'd never come into my territory.
And we haven't, Ray. We haven't.
Once again, Butch trying to gaslight people and try to get away and use his charm to get out of the situation here.
It is such a bizarre situation where the sheriff, who should be their enemy, the guy they're running away from, has been corrupted enough that he's actually their friend, and they are begging him to do one thing, which I know you're going to get into, and he's begging them to tie him up and hit him. You know, like, it's such a funny, again, this is William Goldman just announcing himself as one of the great new screenwriters.
And of course, this is Jeff Corey, a fantastic actor who was in so many incredible films here, Steve, like True Grit. He played the original Tom Chaney, the Josh Brolin character in the original True Grit from 1969, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. And of course, you've covered him in Star Trek, being in an episode of the original series, right?
He's in the Cloudminders, and he's great in that. He might be in 2 Star Trek episodes, actually.
Okay.
Maybe. I don't know. If Mance was here, he would have that at his fingertips. And I also remember him because he's in, isn't he in Oh God that we did?
Yes.
He's one of the guys with Paul Sorvino.
Yes.
He's one of, I think he's one of the, is he the rabbi? He might be the rabbi.
Yeah.
In Oh God. Yeah. Great actor.
Great actor. And 10 years later, he plays Ray Bledsoe in Butch and Sundance, the early days. So clearly didn't mind telling the story. That one starred a young William Catt and a young Tom Berenger as Butch Cassidy. And
didn't remember that's who was in that. I definitely watched all of them. I have no memory of any of them.
Oh, well. But yeah, this guy's a fantastic character actor who's in a number of things. And he does a great job here.
You could at least have the decency to draw your gun.
Now listen to Bush, Ray. He's trying to tell you something. We want to win this trade. You're in the army. Right away. Go fight the Spanish.
Which, of course, is something they were drunkenly talking about when the first posse that they alluded way back when in the film.
You are both of you crazy. They throw you in jail for 1,000 years each.
Now the sheriff has them tie up his legs and his hands, tells Sundance to gag his mouth, even tells him where to find the gags, as he calls them both out for thinking the government would just ignore what they did and let them join the army. Sundance starts looking out the window, which catches the sheriff's attention. And Steve, this is a great bunch of lines here.
I never met a soul more affable than you, but you're faster than the kid. But you're still nothing but 2-bit outlaws on the dodge. It's over. Don't you get that? Your times is over, and you're gonna die bloody. And all you can do is choose where.
And then he apologizes for being mean and has Sundance shut him up by gagging him.
So this is, I mean, we talked about since the beginning of the Cine-Files of, like, in good movies, throwaway characters feel like throwaway characters. Yeah. In great movies, those characters that would be throwaway characters in the other movies are amazing, fully realized, complicated, and fascinating characters. Yeah. And that's what this guy is. I mean, what are we with him for, like 3 minutes, 4 minutes?
Yeah.
And that speech at the end is like, whoa, there is a lot to this guy. Yeah. And it thematically connects to everything you were just talking about and everything that the movie's about. It is an amazing moment in a movie.
Yeah, I agree. And that may be why he wanted to come back and play the same character again 10 years later in that project. So, all right. So we cut to them riding out over the hills, and they just stop and look out at all the dust and sand. And maybe they think, oh, the horse will leave footprints. Maybe they think they can outsmart him. And they go in another direction, right out over some mountains, dismount and perch down to look out over the ridge to see if they can see the super posse. And then out of nowhere, Sundance suddenly turns and shoots a rattlesnake or a snake off of the wall there that had been crawling down. And he certainly rattled himself, but he does give Butch a little bit of a smirk there when he's done it. So it's weird.
I think it's a fascinating moment because for me, I mean, you know, we've talked about subtext many times on the show of like, and these guys are not saying how desperate and scared they are, you know, but that's the subtext here. And the moment for me, of just silent acting from Redford, of the combo of, I'm an amazing shot who just made a ridiculously amazing shot. And I totally fucked us because now they've heard where we had gotten away.
Right.
And now there's this loud gunshot. And if I shouldn't have shot, you know?
Yeah. But also, I'm so rattled, for lack of a better term, that a rattlesnake will cause me to spin and shoot it immediately because I just want to shoot something because I'm so unsettled by what's happening. So, yeah, it just kind of betrays that as well. So we cut to them writing some more. I know there's a lot of writing, guys, but this is part of the movie. And then we see Butch falling backwards into a pool of water.
You're wasting your time. You can't track us over rock.
So maybe over rock, he thought he could lose them. Once again, Butch using all his tactics that he's got in his arsenal.
Tell them that.
And they both see the posse out in the distance, who apparently can track them over rock.
You're beginning to get on my nerves. Who are those guys?
Then Sundance brings up an old memory about him, Butch, and Etta having dinner in Denver.
I'm glad you brought that up, kid. That's an important topic considering our situation.
The night we went gambling, you remember?
And how he got to talking to a guy about a Native American tracker who can track anyone day or night.
Lord Baltimore?
Lord Baltimore, that's right, and he could track anybody.
No, Baltimore works out of Oklahoma. He's strictly an Oklahoma man. I don't know where we are, but it sure as hell isn't Oklahoma. Oh, it couldn't be him.
Whoever it is, it sure the hell is somebody.
It's so good. And by the way, when they get up and start moving at the end of this scene, watch Redford's tired run as they start going up the hill.
Yeah.
Just the physical acting is so good, of just to be able to go, I'm playing a physically in great shape, hugely coordinated guy who's starting to get real tired.
It's funny you say that. We're about to get another sequence where Butch looks real tired, because we cut to them riding over water and then walking their horse up a mountain. And Butch sees the posse in the distance as they walk up and questions if these guys ever get tired or hungry.
Hell, they could even go faster. At least that'd be a change. They don't even break formation. Do something!
They climb up now even further up the mountain over the rocks. And as they stop, we can see that Butch looks dejected. His head is hanging down, which is a body position we have not seen Paul Newman in as Butch up to this point in the movie. And he asks Sundance who the toughest lawman is. And Sundance, after clarifying his meaning for what he means by best.
Toughest.
Joe LeFors.
Gotta be.
LeFors never leaves Wyoming, never. You know that.
He always wears a white skimmer. That's how you tell it's Joe LeFors, because he wears a white straw hat. Look at that guy out front.
And then Butch, who are those guys?
The way this is shot, and this is the great Conrad Hall, one of the great cinematographers. What I love about how it's shot is it is just barely close enough that you think you can make out the straw hat. It's not close. It's not so close that it's obviously, oh yeah, that's a guy in a straw hat. It's that and what's so great about that is it gives you their experience of, I think that might be a straw hat, but I can't 100% tell for sure.
And I do want to make it clear, Conrad Hall said it was George Roy Hill's idea to not show the posse very clearly. And when they were shooting this stuff, all the stuff with the posses, apparently they used radios to coordinate shooting them from a great distance. And George Roy Hill was apparently very pleased with the fortuitous filming in some of the scenes, such as one shot where Butch and Sundance come over the rocks just before they leap, and the posse is seen at the last moment far off in a small clearing. So I went back to watch the scene. Yes, you can see the posse watch them jump into the water at the last possible moment, which I think is a fascinating thing to throw in there as a shot. So it was one of those, this, Steve, as a director, sometimes happy accidents happen. And if you happen to catch a certain shot and it's pretty awesome, it's done like for the people that really catch it. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, absolutely.
We cut to them yanking the horse up the mountain and then back to the posse who is gaining on them, and then back to them taking the horse up the mountain. But Steve, The sound foley here is really great because the hooves of the posse start to sound louder now.
Yep.
So this inevitability now starts to creep in for us as the viewer. There's no longer this distance that we thought was there or that we saw was there for quite some time during the sequence. Now we sense they're getting even closer.
They don't follow the work.
You're the brains, Butch. You'll think of something. That's a load off my mind.
So I think there's like a turn as this goes along from, oh, these guys are really good. What cool thing are we going to do to get away?
Yeah.
And then there's this moment that I think both for the audience and maybe for Butch and Sundance of, oh, I don't know that we're getting away.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the Joe LeFors thing is when it starts, like this sequence this exchange they just had. That's when they both, I mean, the name, you can see Butch and Sundance both react to that name, and I think there's an inevitability of that name.
Well, and this is why and of course, they're never called the Super Posse in the movie. Right. That's just the name that has been given to them in film lore.
Yeah.
But I think there's a reason why this exists is that they are literally superhuman.
Yes.
They are the Super Posse is a mystical force.
Right.
It is not a human force. You never see them up close. We don't actually know who we find out later who's in it from Etta, but like it's just this super powerful pursuers that are inescapable. That's how we start to feel.
I think Johnny Cash sang a song about this called Ghost Riders in the Sky.
Oh,
if you
yeah,
guys
totally.
haven't heard that song before, do yourself a favor. It's one of my favorites. All right, then they descend down the hill to a cliff. They look around and see that there's no other way out, which really pisses off Sundance.
Well, the way I figure it, we can either fight or give. If we give, we go to jail.
I've been there already.
Already implying that he ain't ever going back. And we do know that neither one of them went back to prison.
If we fight, they stay right where they are and starve us out. Or go for position, shoot us. Might even get a rock slide started and get us that way. What else can I do?
They could surrender to us, but I wouldn't count on that.
And then Sundance sees that the posse is already caught up to them and is getting into position. As Sundance tells him to get ready, Butch, who we see in the background, like Paul Newman, we see in the background, start to look a little bit over the cliff. So a little bit kind of letting us know that he's looking into a certain place. And as I said, Butch, looking over the canyon, says,
Ready?
No, we'll jump.
Like hell we will.
Like at this point, like it's the first time we watch the movie, you're like, well, wait, are they going to jump? Will they jump? What is this all about?
Let me tell you what my note is on this scene. I wrote, the greatness of this scene is unfucking deniable.
Yeah.
For me, this is the scene of the movie. It is so great. It's all of their charisma and fun and the interaction of their characters brought up to the max.
Yeah.
And I think the dawning realization, I think my reaction of no, we'll jump. I, as the audience member, go, yes, there is a way to escape. And then you get to the reaction from Sundance. And that's what makes this scene so fucking magical, is that reaction and where it's going to go next.
Yeah, there's a honesty in this, right? And this is what makes it a neo-Western, because you would never see this in a Randolph Scott Western or in a, old school Western, Gene Autry Western, or even a John Wayne Western at this point. I think eventually you would see that certain segments certain Westerns in the 1970s would have this kind of stuff. But in this moment, you're having this exchange between the two of them that is so honest. They almost kind of regress back to being teenagers, challenging each other to jump off a cliff. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
If the water's deep enough, we don't get swished to death. They'll never follow us.
How do you know?
Would you make a jump like that and you didn't have to?
I have to, and I'm not gonna.
It's so great because, first of all, we love seeing Sundance fight. So that he's pulled out his gun and we're seeing these guys go into position. We're like, oh, what's Sundance going to do? Part of you wants to see that.
Yeah.
But you're also with Butch of the only way to do this is to jump. And we don't know what Sundance's resistance is yet.
They're just going to have to go back down the same way they come. Come on.
Just one clear shot, that's all I want.
Come on. We got to.
Up. Get away from me.
Why?
I want to fight him.
The moment that Sundance goes, get away from me, is the first moment of tension between the two.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because they've been so fun up to this point.
Right.
They've been so just like, this is the joking way they do everything. Like when we're dealing with, the guy at the Hole in Wall gang and 1, 2, 3 go and all that stuff, they're together. And in this moment, the way that Redford like pulls away from him and is like, don't touch me, is so, we're like, what is going on? What is happening?
Why is he reacting like this? Yeah, exactly. And Butch asks him why, because Butch is even perplexed. He's probably never seen this side of Sundance directed towards him.
I'll jump first.
No. Then you jump first.
No, I said.
What's the matter with you?
I can't swim.
I want everyone to watch this scene and look at the nod that Redford makes after he says, I can't swim.
Yeah.
He goes, I can't swim, and then I'm going to do it so John can see. He goes, I can't swim.
Yes.
And it's like this exclamation, this period on the sentence.
Yeah.
Like it's like he's going with his head saying, there, now you know my secret.
Yeah.
Now I've exposed this thing. I actually, the Sundance Kid, have a weakness. There is a thing that I can't do.
Yeah.
I am afraid. Like all of that is in that one nod from Redford. It is one of my favorite moments of acting, bar none.
Yeah. And I also think this is such a deft way to get people to connect with characters that are outlaws, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing that really becomes a big deal through the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. The anti-hero becomes a big, big deal, right? And look, both of these guys are outlaws. They rob people's hard-earned money from banks. They kill, Sundance has killed people. Butch hasn't, of course, but they do these things to fund their lifestyle because they don't want to get a real job. They don't want to actually work for their money. They'd rather do this, right? So how do you make them relatable to the audience, or how do you get them, the audience, on their side? Well, first of all, you cast two really good-looking guys. Second, you cast guys that have a great chemistry with each other and an ease with each other. And third, you show them being human and give them flaws, right? I mean, The Sopranos wouldn't have worked if Tony didn't have issues with his mom and a therapist who was trying to help him out. Like, as terrible as Tony is in the show, and they do remind you every once in a while how much of a terrible person he is, the fact that he is on this journey to try to heal himself or cure himself or deal with issues that we all have, issues with our parents growing up, like, that makes him relatable amidst all the madness, And so it's important when you see these things. Or Breaking Bad, he goes down this path, but he didn't start as a bad guy. He goes down this path because of situations and circumstances. And yes, he's responsible for the decisions he makes, but you have to give them some humanity here. And I think this is a great moment where we see Butch's humanity, who's been a very straight-laced, straight-arrow person, all of a sudden a little vulnerability, which I think is great.
I think so too. I would say it's different from the Sopranos thing, because Butch and Sundance are definitely criminals, but they're not doing many of the horrible things that we're seeing in The Sopranos.
Well, fair.
But more importantly is that one of the there are many secrets to making characters likable. Yeah. But one of the secrets is to cast Paul Newman and Robert Redford.
Yes, 100%.
Why, are you crazy? The fall will probably kill you.
And that, in some messed up way, is how he convinces him to take the jump here, Steve, because Sundance considers it for a moment, gets his nerve up, and they jump off together holding a gun belt as Sundance yells, "Oh, shit." Oh, and I think this is a great button on this scene, man.
It's perfect. And one of the things I love about it is we go from the fall will probably kill you, which is perfectly logical,
of course,
in a way of like, look, you're going to die anyway. But then they never actually say, Sundance never says, okay, I will jump. There's just a moment. And I just love the sort of sound that sort of builds up as you realize they've made the decision.
He's psyching himself up.
Totally. And the jump is so satisfying. It's so, and by the way, so this was, we just did MASH, which was shot at the Malibu Ranch up in the mountains. Yeah. And that's where this jump into the river was done, I think.
Yes. Started out in Colorado, but then they jumped onto a mat. But then what you're talking about, the stunt people we see in the distance falling down, that's where, exactly where they shot is what you're mentioning there. All right. So they've landed in the waters, Steve. And we see one of the posse watching them in the water as we hear Butch complaining about Sundance choking him because obviously Sundance cannot swim. And they head down the river out of sight. And then we cut to later that night. They are walking up as Etta is sitting in the foreground. We see Etta, once again, this usage of foreground and background, which is really interesting work here by George Roy Hill. We see Etta's face, Katherine Ross, clearly pondering what she's going to do with her life, what she knows about the situation. We could read all kinds of things going on in her face. And then we see Butch and Sundance walking up behind her. Etta rushes over off the porch to hug them.
They said you were dead.
Don't make a big thing out of it.
And then as she's walking by, he stops her.
No, make a big thing out of it.
And then they embrace. So this is one of those, again, another rare moment where Sundance lets the walls down for a little bit.
It's so interesting because to be clear, and spoiler alert, Sundance is not always the best date.
Best partner. What do you think?
There's some issues there, but the moment of vulnerability of on second thought, make a big thing about it. Yeah. It's the only time that they really acknowledge just how goddamn scared they were.
Yeah,
being chased by these guys.
Yes, good point.
Why would these guys join up and take after us, though?
Oh, forget it. A bunch like that won't stay together long.
They will, if Mr. Harriman has his way.
Who?
Mr. E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific Railroad.
The plant of the name E.H. Harriman is handled so well. And this is, you don't think about it this way, but this is a classic rule of threes because we introduce E.H. Harriman with Woodcock, and it's really funny from this funny guy. And then we come back and we see him again and that they've made the safe bigger and that how important E.H. Harriman, but we still think of that name as funny.
Yeah.
Because of the way those scenes operate. Right. And now when this name comes up again, it's totally transformed. That's how the rule of threes kind of works is you establish, you repeat, you transform. And so this time, this name that was associated with something that was totally fun is not fun anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And now Butch goes into like businessman mode.
Set up like that costs more than we ever took.
Apparently he can afford it.
That's bad business. How long do you think I'd stay in operation if every time I pulled a job it cost me money? If he'd just pay me what he's spending to make me stop robbing him, I'd stop robbing him.
This is a great mini soliloquy from Butch. Because in real life, E.H. Harriman did try to negotiate with Butch and Butch wouldn't do it.
Oh, really?
So to turn it around. Yeah, that's what I was looking up some of the historical facts on this. And Butch, so the fact that Butch couldn't, so that they kind of turn it around in the movie a little bit here. But him all of a sudden being an eat the rich guy out of nowhere, like a Robin Hood guy being mad at these wealthy dudes, that's something new. We have not seen from Butch and his character or reasonings at all for the reasons why he's robbing the banks.
If he'd just pay me what he's spending to stop robbing him, I'd stop robbing him. It's just such a perfectly delusional line. And again, you know what? You've totally blown my mind about this film because I really hadn't thought about it as accepting adulthood or responsibility or things like that. I really wasn't thinking about it. But Butch's line is a perfect example. And I think he does think of himself on some level as a Robin Hood figure, even though he totally isn't.
No,
but he is generous with the prostitutes and people and like spends money freely and is a nice guy that everybody likes. Yeah. And I think that is his rationalization for the fact that, as you said, he's a criminal, you know?
Yeah.
You say they're hired permanent?
No, just till they kill you.
Which stops them both cold as Etta pours them their drinks. This is interesting. Etta is the one who is just kind of giving it's a fascinating decision, right, Steve? Because we have questions as the audience. Like, what's the posse? Who hired him? Why is this happening? Why are they rattling our heroes? And here comes Etta, who's only been introduced in one scene up to this point in the film. Well, one sequence, rather, up to this point in the film. And she, in essence, has all the exposition. She has all the answers, but it makes sense because she's been reading the papers. So the way they did it, I think, is really smart as well in terms of the writing. William Goldman smartly using a character that we've already seen and that we like and that we inherently trust, giving the information to Butch and Sundance, I think is really smart. You know,
it hadn't occurred to me until just now, but based on what we've been saying about this being a movie about growing up and responsibility and stuff, Etta is a grown up.
Yes, she is.
Etta is a grown up, and I think Etta is a grown up who's going to have fun losing her responsibility and playing with the kids for a while.
Sure.
But deep down, she knows. Yeah. Etta is not delusional in the way that Butch and Sundance both are.
What is it that the baker's wife, essentially, in Into the Woods, when she has the affair quickly with the guy, when she realizes, back to work, back to life, so it's that kind of thing is her she's an adult. She's clearly an adult in the relationship with the baker, right? And then when they get out into the woods and she has that little mini fling with one of the princes, right? She wants to continue the fling, and he's the one that's like, "This was just a moment in the woods, our moment," and then just kind of pushes it off, right? And so she has to kind of wake herself back up and go, because in real life sometimes we do escape, or if we see the moment to escape and we can escape, we do. And sometimes it's good for the soul. Sometimes it's bad, depending on what you're doing when you escape. But I think sometimes it is necessary, if you're built that way, to have that little moment of rebellion or freedom from all your responsibilities for just a little while. And I think that's what happens with Etta eventually, in the situation when they head to Bolivia and she takes part in the robberies. So,
I mean, there's that quote of all things in moderation, including moderation,
That's great. Yes.
Means they're still after us, Butch. And it's going to be the same thing all over again.
Then we cut to Butch and Sundance talking inside as Etta sits out on the porch staring out. This is an interesting scene or sequence or setup here, Steve, because there is still a patriarchy here in this situation. Etta is sitting outside while the men talk. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's a way of them having their conversation while she is in earshot, so she can hear what they're saying, but she's also kind of contemplating what she's going to do with her life sitting out there on the porch. So it's a fascinating sequence to let us know what the relationship is between them at this time in history,
This is what makes it fit in to me to a real 70s movie. I mean, 69, but it's like structurally, we can't predict this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, it's like we're clearly have reached a turning point.
Yeah.
And what's interesting too, that you've sort of set up is like, we barely know Etta,
Barely know Etta. Absolutely.
Two scenes with her. And yet she is now going to become a part of, her. It's not just a turning point for Butch and Sundance. It's actually a turning point for Etta,
Yeah. And I have to say, this is my favorite Katherine Ross performance. I know she's great in The Graduate. I know she's great in other things, but I like the steel here of her and the matter of factness and the acceptance of the situation without losing who she is. And I kind of love that. It's a very difficult performance to pull off, and I love her in the movie.
It never occurred to me until just now, but it's funny that in both of these stories, she is a woman in very troubling relationships.
Yeah. Yes.
But I agree with you. I think Etta is a much stronger character than the character in The Graduate.
Yeah.
And I think she's great. And it's strange. I mean, honestly, I know she does other things, but it's these two movies. That's what she is remembered for.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll get you some more.
So clearly, Steve, that's a little mini window into their relationship that he's, been demanding of her. He's been abusive of her at times, or expecting things from her. Just that little exchange gives you a mini window into, the fact that she thinks he's walking out to ask for more food instead of to check in with her to see how she's doing or to have a conversation with her. There's a little bit of the understanding of their relationship and their positions in the relationship.
I was just thinking about the line from Etta where she says to Butch, "If I had met you first, do you think we'd be together?"
Wow.
And I don't think they would be. And the reason is because I don't think Butch stays with women. Is that if she had met Butch first, they would have had a really fun weekend.
Yes.
And maybe they'd have another really fun weekend 6 months later. But Sundance, in some Sundancian level, while not a very good boyfriend, is actually monogamous in this way. I mean, not that he probably sleeps with prostitutes too, but you know what I mean? Like Sundance is the stable person to have the relationship with, even though he's not very good at relationships.
Well, a lot of women talk about being with men who sleep around. Look, and I'm a dude saying this. I'm not trying to speak for women or anything, but I've seen documentaries, seen interviews where they're asked about what is it about? Why did you stay with a guy when he, clearly was doing whatever? And ask the other women, why did you especially the guys who've had multiple families at the same time, which is always one of the most weirdest things in the world to me, because I can't imagine how incredibly exhausting it must be to have multiple families, try to hide them from each other and whatever. But the idea is they each say he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world every minute I was around him. And so I go back to what Agnes said to him, right? Like, you're the greatest guy. You always treat me well. You always ask how I'm doing. You ask about my life while she's singing and like about to have sex with him, right? It's clear that I think you're right. He would have had a fantastic weekend with Etta and been like, Etta would have felt like we're making a connection or whatever. And then he would have ghosted her for weeks and then eventually come back into town and had another fantastic weekend with her because he's a kind of a child in that way. Like he's not one to settle down. Butch is not one to settle down. So he likes this sequence that he can kind of dip into this relationship when it feels convenient for him and dip out of it when it's convenient for him.
Butch and me have been talking it all over. Wherever the hell Bolivia is, that's where we're off to.
Yeah, we'll go down there and play it safe. Maybe keep our hand in a little bit.
Butch speaks some Spanish.
I can wrestle with the menu, okay?
And you speak it good.
And then Sundance, this is an interesting exchange, Steve, considering our conversation in the first part about how he treats Etta, and of course what we just said now about their treatment or about their relationship.
And it'd be good cover going with a woman. No one expects it. We could travel safer. What I'm saying is if you want to go, I won't stop you. But the minute you start to whine or make a nuisance, I don't care where we are, I'm dumping you flat.
So it's really a good thing that you have Robert Redford looks and Robert Redford charisma because, oh my God, is that a horrible, because it's essentially a proposal, but the worst one anyone has ever given.
Right. Well, he's not even saying like, I want you to come with me because I love you. He's saying you'd be good cover for us having a woman with us, right?
But if you start to be a pain in the ass, you're out. It's just terrible.
But this is how emotionally arrested is the word I think you might use in how Sundance is, because he can't express his feelings. And look, some women like men who can't talk about their feelings. This absolutely, it kind of attracts them, the mystery of it all. How do I get him to do it? You know, and some men play that game because they know it gets an interest from women to stay in the mystery of it all. So they keep playing that game. I was never one of those. I was never good at it. So I had very difficult relationships because I would always just kind of give my emotions right off the bat. And thankfully I finally found someone who loves that. And I love it when she does it. So it took me a long time, but eventually we found each other. But yeah, I couldn't do what Sundance is doing in so many ways. And then Butch, just like he did when Sundance handed off Etta after their bike ride.
Don't sugarcoat it like that, kid. Tell her straight.
But clearly, Etta understands the situation, has accepted this situation for her own reasons. And then she says this. And this is interesting, Steve. This little mini paragraph of lines is fascinating window into Etta.
I'm 26, and I'm single and a school teacher, and that's the bottom of the pit. And the only excitement I've known is here with me now. So I'll go with you, and I won't whine. And I'll sew your socks, and I'll stitch you when you're wounded. And I'll do anything you ask of me, except one thing. I won't watch you die. I'll miss that scene if you don't mind.
And then she walks off. So this is an empowering moment for Etta. And as you said, Steve, someone we haven't seen that much in the film, but she gives us essentially her life story in these lines.
My first reaction, by the way, is like, okay, Katherine Ross is one of the most beautiful women in the world, and she can't get a date in this environment. That does seem unlikely. That being said, I think it is an amazing speech. And this is why both you and I respond more to her performance in this movie than in The Graduate, because in The Graduate, she's essentially a victim.
Yeah, she's being yanked from one side to the
not in control, upset, doesn't always know exactly what's going on. And this character of Etta, despite, or actually including the way Sundance just treated her, is making the most rational assessment of her, or what she believes is a rational assessment of where she is in the world and what she needs. And she says, this is who I am, this is what I want, and this is what my boundaries are. Yeah. That is like a really, talk about maturity. Like it's an amazing moment in the movie.
Yeah. And by the way, there are a lot of speculation about Etta, because after what happens in Bolivia to Butch and Sundance, Etta is never heard from again. So we don't know what she did. There is rumors that she applied to get a death certificate for Sundance. Like a woman came in and applied. There's a record of a woman applying 9 days after the supposed death of Butch and Sundance for a death certificate for Sundance, possibly to return back to America and claim anything that is in his name. But It is big speculation of who Etta Place was. Some people said she was an innkeeper. Some other places claim that she was a prostitute. George Roy Hill is the one who made her a school teacher because he looked at a picture of her and said, she looks much better than everybody else I've seen who's a prostitute in these other pictures. So I'm just going to say she's a school teacher. So that was fabricated for the film. There's no historical evidence that she was a school teacher at all. So it's an interesting sequence to have her say that she's a school teacher. So we cut to the next morning, and everyone, Steve, is in their Sunday best and getting into this horse-drawn carriage. They really, all three of them, again, beautiful people, looking fantastic. Great costumes in this movie, by the way.
Well, that actually, if you don't mind, that brings
please.
up a question from one of our patrons.
Hey!
Which is from my old friend and longtime patron, Matt Grieber, who asks, and he says two questions. This is his joke question.
Okay.
Has there ever been a better movie with two better looking lead actors? And I will add Katherine Ross into this mix as well.
Yeah, I say that's a great trio to have a question about that for. Wow.
There's only one that I can think of off the top of my head, and that is Ocean's 11. With Pitt and Clooney.
And Pitt.
Yeah.
Although there are some people who don't find Pitt attractive, which I think is weird.
I think objectively he is attractive, but I guess that is as subjective and objective statement as I could possibly make. But I actually don't think, and I think Pitt and Clooney are also both extremely charismatic. I do not think they are quite at the level of Redford and Newman.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
Right. No, I don't think so either. Because, I mean, and you'd have to throw Julia in for the Etta role, I guess.
Sure.
If you were to compare. Although I don't find Julia Roberts attractive. I know that many people do. So you could make the case.
I am with you. This will go back to other subjective statements, but I'm kind of more with you.
Could you argue Sherlock Holmes? I mean, Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. Are they not?
Sure. Well, and then there's also, since you mentioned Jude Law, I just went, in Talented Mr. Ripley, him and Matt Damon are both totally good looking.
Yeah. With Gwyneth, you could argue Gwyneth as the female trio there. Yeah. A lot of people do find Gwyneth attractive. Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really. Great question by Matt. I hadn't really sat down and kind of looked at it and seen, but I'm sure you could come up with a top 10 list. Hello.
This could be a Cinephile short of the most beautiful people in a particular movie.
Well, as we were saying, they're all in their Sunday best, getting in this horse-drawn carriage. But before we go, we have to have a defiant moment of the Old West against modernization as Butch tosses the bike that he once rode around beautifully to Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head with Etta. He tosses the bike.
Future's all yours, you lousy bicycles.
And as the bike tire spins in the water, we hear a rare sound cue from Burt Bacharach's score. So we go into this montage full of sepia-toned photos of them traveling to Bolivia eventually, but mixed in before they get there, they go to all these different places in this montage. We see trains and cars in New York, horse-drawn buggies, young kids, policemen in uniforms, tenements, rowboats on the water, interspersed with shots of the trio in various states of joy, looking like they are people who are about the town, people of a certain status. And we see them getting photos done of themselves, which is one of the iconic photos that we used for the thumbnail for the first part of this particular conversation. We see trolleys, the beach, the ocean. They're in old bathing suits. We go to a carnival. We see carnival stuff like carnival rides from that time. And then finally on a steamer, they are there on a steamer leaving America to head to Bolivia. Now, before we get to the steamer, though, Steve, I do want to say this is an interesting bit of trivia for the movie because Hello Dolly was being shot at the same time on a set there that Butch Cassidy and Sundance was being shot. And George Roy Hill thought, because of the same studio, that he was going to be able to use those sets to shoot these New York scenes in, but they would not allow him to use the sets because they wanted to keep the sets for Dolly a secret, and so they refused him permission. So then George Roy Hill had Robert Redford, Paul Newman, and Katherine Ross simply pose on the sets and took photos of them. He then inserted image of the three stars into a series of 300 actual period photos and spliced the two different sets, both real and posed, together to form the New York City montage. So it's a montage, but a lot of work went into this montage, Steve.
It was so funny. It was only watching it this last time that I went, oh, this has to be composites. This can't be real. But because it's done really beautifully. And the thought that I had watching it was, I was like, oh, this is like the Ken Burns effect, which is what you see in all of his documentaries, where you're zooming in or moving across an old still photo. And I suddenly went, man, I wish we had Ken Burns here. I mean, I wish we had Ken Burns to be a guest on our show anyway. But to actually ask him, I wonder if you were influenced by this. You know, this is 69. Did he see this and and sort of invent this technique in documentary because he watched Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid?
That's a great question. Because then you have to say, well, it's because in obviously in iMovie, it's called the Ken Burns effect when you use it. Yeah. So is this really the John C. Howard, Richard C. Meyer effect, who are the editors of the film? Or is this the George Roy Hill effect? Yeah. Or the Conrad Hall effect, possibly? So questions must be asked. Questions must be asked.
The other thought I had is watching the sequences. I was like, you know, it was weird the way this went into my brain. I was like, there's the 70s is the era where we break away from old Hollywood.
Yeah.
And yet there's this weird element of nostalgia in a few of the greatest 70s movies. And I suddenly went, oh, it's actually two directors, because it's George Roy Hill doing this and The Sting. And it's Peter Bogdanovich doing Last Picture Show and Paper Moon. Are these they're four really nostalgic films in the early 70s.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love this montage because, I mean, they kind of fit seamlessly into the big. Yes, they stand out, you can tell, but I think they still fit. And so it's believable, right? It's very similar to like The Shining, where Jack Nicholson is standing in front of all those pictures. It totally looks like it's 1941 or whatever. But like seeing, or I can't remember the year, 1928, I can't remember. It's been a bit since the show put out. But like seeing this montage, I think is fantastic. And once again, Steve, we go from sepia to color, right? As we get to the end of the sequence. And it's a great break, right? We've seen all this tension and frustration and chase or whatever. So let's reconnect with them. Let's have a little fun with them. Let's see them enjoying life a little bit. I don't know where they got the money to do all the things that they're doing that they do in this montage, but they're clearly living it up a little bit before they get on this steamer to Bolivia. And maybe it's a one last gasp. Maybe I bet Butch talked them all into it and said, let's just blow it out one more time since we're leaving America for good or what have you.
Totally.
And they had fun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, we are in Bolivia as we move to live action. And once again, the sepia tone fades as a train that says Nacionales de Bolivia goes by, leaving Sundance, Etta, and Butch so well dressed in front of this dilapidated train station in Bolivia. This isn't the paradise they were expecting, Steve.
No, it definitely is not. And I was just sitting there going, man, you really should have checked Yelp or TripAdvisor or something before you pick. I also go like, why did they pick this spot? I mean, there were like bigger cities in Bolivia than this. How did they end up being dropped at this particular train station in the middle of nowhere?
I don't know what the cities were like in Bolivia in the 1800s. I wonder what was going on back then. It's a good thing to explore and maybe have a conversation about at some point for sure. But yeah, it's a fascinating. But I think this is done obviously for the narrative of the movie. Like,
it's
they
perfect.
were living it up, right? And now the reality is coming to meet them yet again, right? And ironically, this is essentially like the Old West in the way that it looks, right?
Totally.
As Butch walks through the station and we see a bunch of animals out back, including llamas and pigs.
You know, it could be worse. You get a lot more for your money in Bolivia. I checked on it.
What could they have here that you could possibly want to buy?
The length of the silence that leads up to that point is delicious. It is so, and it's because it's been so perfectly set up. And in particular, it's perfectly set up by the beautiful, elegant montage and all the life that they've been living. So then the reality, because it's like super posse, desperation, we're never going to survive, into cocktails and dancing and living the high life, into the silence of just looking around and realizing, oh shit, this is where we are now.
Yeah. Butch is the brains.
Yeah.
This is what he suggested. This is where you are. And I think we're going to see from this point forward that Sundance is much more of the angry child that is mad at his dad for bringing him here.
Totally.
All Bolivia can't look like this.
How do you know? This might be the garden spot of the whole country. People may travel hundreds of miles just to get to this spot where we're standing now. This might be the Atlantic City, New Jersey of all Bolivia, for all you know.
I think this is where you see that Redford's previous claim to fame was for doing Neil Simon. And Neil Simon is all about, Neil Simon is the great comedic genius of arguments, of rants, whether it's The Odd Couple or The Goodbye Girl, or he writes the best rants there are. And here is Sundance having a rant and arguing like that whole thing. It is so funny. He's so good at it.
Look, I know a lot more about Bolivia than you know about Atlantic City, New Jersey. I can tell you that.
Aha! You do, huh? I was born there. I was born in New Jersey.
Again, it's a fascinating opening into their relationship and how little they actually talk. This is dude stuff, isn't it? Dudes rarely, like when they get together, especially the quiet dudes, they rarely reveal too much about themselves.
Well, they didn't know their names until a few scenes ago.
Right.
You know, all of their and yet these guys know each other perfectly on a certain level, but they don't know this detail. And there is a moment, which I was curious, I don't know if you saw, if anything came up in your research, where Sundance like kicks a stick and then really kicks it. And it just looks to me like that was improv. It looks to me like he accidentally tripped into it and then kicked it. And it's such a great moment.
Agreed. And I think, you know, I was in Laughter on the 23rd Floor.
Right.
So it's one of my favorite things ever. And you're right. There are some great arguments in that play that are so much fun to be a part of or to watch, you know? So you're 100% right. He writes the best arguments.
People do not give Neil Simon the credit that he deserves as one, because I think because there was particularly a certain era, I'm sure you were around where everybody did a Neil Simon monologue.
Sure.
Every community theater was doing The Odd Couple and was doing California Suite or whatever. And so I think all the intelligentsia poo-pooed Neil Simon because it was so, it's easy on certain level, but man, he's the best. He's just so good.
And clearly we've disrespected him, Steve, because how many films have we done from Neil Simon?
We have done 0 as far as I know.
We are terrible people.
No, I mean, we did My Favorite Year that's Neil Simon adjacent.
It's influenced by Neil Simon. Laughter on the 23rd Floor for sure. But
I mean, like for me, the best Neil Simon movie, it's either The Goodbye Girl or maybe Biloxi Blues.
Wow. You don't... Sunshine Boys, come on.
Oh, Sunshine Boys.
Come on.
I had forgotten. Yeah, sure.
I love that.
Okay, well, then maybe that's, you know, we actually were just looking at our schedule. We have almost the entire rest of this year blocked out. But Neil Simon, we're coming for you eventually.
Enter. Oh, no. Come in. Enter. Anyway, I'm sorry. I just love that movie so much.
Someday you and I will do that. I think
you and I should do the play.
That's what I'm saying. Is someday we will do the play. We got another 10 or 15 years, 20 years, and we can do it.
All right. We'll see. I'm down.
You're from the East? I didn't know that.
The total tonnage of what you don't know is enough to shatter.
I'm not sure we're accomplishing as much as we might here.
Listen, your job is to back me up because you'd starve without me. And your job is to shut up.
And then Butch, who's clearly, now both of them seem to be in a bit of a dysfunctional relationship with Sundance at this point. Butch looks over to Etta and says, well, he'll feel a lot better after he's robbed a couple of banks. And then Sundance lets out one of these laughs.
Bolivia.
Did your parents say anything to you about Bolivia when you're watching this movie? Like,
of course.
Like what? Like as they show up and there's a llama there. Like, what did they say? Like,
this is before I was born. This movie, right? So my parents met in 1969. One of the first movies they saw together was Butch Cassidy.
Wow.
And so the fact that Bolivia was in it, as we said when we were talking the first part, I don't remember when I saw this movie, but it was a staple in our house whenever it came on because Bolivia was such a big part of the movie. Just like Scarface. Cochabamba is where my father was born and raised. So Cochabamba is where Sosa is at. So it is a big part of my upbringing is having those films that mention Bolivia because they rarely do films mention Bolivia. Argentina, Brazil gets all the effing love, but Bolivia rarely gets mentioned. So the fact that it was part of this Wonderful film. And that it was a Western. Like there was just so much about it that for me as a young kid really appealed to me. And it's also for me, I think I have a distinctly different experience when I watch the movie because like I don't really like Butch and Sundance as we get into Bolivia. I start to really not like them because of what they do to these people and the townsfolks.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting experience whenever I watch the movie because I do love them up until this point, you know?
Yep.
All right, Steve. So we cut now to Butch and Sundance staking out their first bank here and analyzing how they're going to rob it. You know, doing research for the for this episode and for this movie, this is what Butch was known for. Like, this is not something they're fabricating. He was very meticulous. In fact, a lot of historians claim that he only robbed a few things because he was so meticulous about his preparation and his planning, staking things out, spending weeks, sometimes months staking out a place before robbing it. And that's why he was also so successful. So we see a little bit of it here as him and Sundance are trying to case it, clearly with a much smaller crew, obviously, but
Right.
that's how he approached things.
It's such an interesting thing to think about because from what you describe, each of them were only in jail once, right?
Yes, once and early on in their lives.
So obviously in this film, they're going to meet a horrible end, but
Right.
these guys are pretty damn successful crooks.
Yes. But it also explains why Etta says to him earlier in the film, like, why are you guys always out of money?
Yeah.
And sure, Butch did love living the high life, but also if you rob few and far between, you're going to make less and less. So he goes out quicker.
Hell, it's just a bank like any other bank. Gotta move in slowly, check out everything.
And Sundance, who clearly, as we've seen, Steve, is getting real snippy with Butch lately, says,
The thing to remember when
Don't tell me how to rob a bank. I know how to rob a bank.
Boy, a few dark clouds appear on your horizon, you just go all to pieces, don't you?
another fun back and forth between them. And Steve, we've had these moments with friends, right? Where they're like, they get a little emotional and the other one's like, oh, I'm sorry. All right. Excuse me. Pardon me for existing.
With friends, with each other. We've both been Butch and or Sundance in these exact like, sorry, geez, wow. Well, and I don't think Sundance ever recovers from the super posse, to be honest.
Oh, rattled by the super posse.
Great point. Well, and also his faith in Butch was maximum. Like, even though he would make fun of him, and even though he saw many of his flaws, he was like, Butch has got this all figured out. I just have to trust in Butch. He doesn't have, when they show up in Bolivia and they see what they see, that is not there anymore. It is reduced.
Yeah. You just keep thinking Butch, or maybe stop thinking now. With Sundance where he's at. So they walk into the bank, and as the guard greets them, very pleasant, very friendly, very courteous, offering them in Spanish numerous things they can do in the bank, Butch ends up walking out all of a sudden, which surprises Sundance, who lingers for just a little bit and then walks out as the guard very kindly says, adios.
Redford's reaction to the dawning realization that I speak some Spanish was completely not true is priceless. And here is the epiphany I had watching it this last time. Was we talked about in our first part, what is Butch Cassidy's superpower? His superpower is his charm and his affability.
Yeah.
By moving to Bolivia, it's like he put kryptonite around his neck. He no longer has a superpower. He will never again be able to just charm people.
Right. Because he doesn't know the language.
Yeah.
If he had learned the language really well, like he claimed to Sundance that he could, I think he'd have been just fine making this transition. And for historical context, people should know they were 8 years in South America. Right. They originally went to Argentina and were in Patagonia for a while. Then they robbed a few banks, got chased out of the country, went to Chile, and hung out in Chile for a bit before ending up in Bolivia. So this was an 8-year trek before we get to Bolivia. But of course, the film doesn't have time to do all of that. So we see Etta trying to teach Butch more Spanish and Sundance more Spanish. This is a theft. Este es un robo. Sundance looks back at them with anger on his face.
I don't know why I have to do any of this. He's the one who claimed he knew the damn language.
We've been over this before. Your line of work requires a specialized vocabulary.
I got nervous. I forgot the word. Shoot me. You've had worse ideas lately.
It's so funny because if you were to say like what are the qualities that Robert Redford has as an actor? Like just like what it's like, well, there's an intelligence there, obviously. There's a solidity there. And I wouldn't necessarily go, I want to cast him as you describe as the person who becomes the petulant child.
Yeah.
But boy, he's good at it. And again, I go to Neil Simon because Neil Simon is all about comedy existing in anger. And that is what, and of course, which I think you mentioned before, is it's not like Sundance tries to learn Spanish.
No.
It's like, Butch, solve this problem for me.
Sundance only does what Sundance does well, and that's shoot. And he can't be bothered to do anything else. And he doesn't, as we're going to find out, he doesn't even shoot like regular people shoot. No. He can only shoot well in a one position, you know. Yeah. And so we find that out as we go along. And so he's very clearly a man who is stuck in his ways. And we are a far cry from the guy who stood by Butch against Harvey Logan.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even remember that at this point in the movie. That's how far we've come. But we cut to them having dinner as the sun is going down. Etta is teaching them more phrases for the robbery as they eat, like raise your hands, los manos arriba. And then we cut back to Etta and Sundance in bed as she's still trying to teach Sundance to say the words. As Steve said, he's stubbornly refusing to learn these words. But on the other side of the wall here is Butch.
Butch, are you still thinking in there?
What the hell else is there to do?
Try this one. Where is the safe? Open it.
Butch struggles with it and then eventually cheats because Butch is a criminal. He cheats and pulls out his crib sheet and says it perfectly, to which Etta says, that's very good, Butch. You're a good teacher, Etta. So this idea of a school teacher, I guess, is coming in handy for the narrative that they created here with Goldman's script. Steve.
Well, that was the comment I was going to make too. And in particular, because these are students.
Yes.
And they're not grown-up students who are responsibly learning their tasks. They're petulant child students who are cheating.
Yes. These are the people who are being kept after school, for sure.
Exactly.
All right, so then we cut to Butch in close-up, who is robbing the bank now and doing it with some decent Spanish. Esto es un robo, but he doesn't quite have the words right. So he pulls out his cheat sheet and reads it.
Manos arriba.
They got him up. Skip on down.
Arriba.
Skip on down.
Todos ustedes arismense a la pared.
They're against the wall already.
Donde es? Ah, you're so damn smart, you read it.
So clearly, Steve, even when they're robbing the bank, they're having issues with the Spanish and getting along.
It's perfect comedy. The comedy is so good. The reactions from Redford.
Oh my God.
As the note comes out. And then what I love too is Redford has, picked up enough Spanish to know what Butch is saying.
Yes.
Right. And the disconnect between, so it's like, what's so funny about the scene is like Sundance knows what the words mean and that Butch is saying it in the right time. Butch has his cheat sheet to say the right words, but he's so focused on his cheat sheet, he can't see that they're the wrong words at the wrong time. You know what I mean? Like that's what, and it's reaction shots. It's the looks between them. It's the performances. It's the bewildered looks of the people, of the Bolivians with their hands in the air. Like the whole scene is hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely works for sure. Then we cut to outside with Etta and the getaway horses as Butch and Sundance run out, sniping at each other about Butch's crib sheet and who did what. And as they take off, the guard and the robbed people run out of the bank yelling, "Bandidos!" The guard runs off to get the comisario, which is essentially the commissioner or the chief there. We cut to him running into this building and running up to the desk sergeant and says, "Comandante, dos hombres acaban de asaltar el banco," basically saying 2 men have robbed the bank. He asks, who are they? And he says, "Dos Yankees y una muchacha." I'm going to assume you people listening know what a muchacha is. The policemen jump up and they head out after him. Oh, good, I wrote down here. Another posse going after Butch and Sundance in another country, Steve.
By the way, it's so fun, and I will keep most of it in, of hearing you actually deliver the lines in Spanish. That's actually, we've never been able to use your Spanish speaking on the Cine-Files, and that's kind of awesome.
I'm a little rusty, so for those of you listening who are much more natural speakers than me, I apologize. But I do speak it fluently. I just am a little rusty. I only talk about Spanish with my mom and no one else in my life, unfortunately. We see Butch, Sundance, and Etta right off as the singers kick in with their with the police bearing down on the trio. As they ride past us in frame, we see the police coming up. But as the police turn the corner, the music stops as shots ring out from the trio, who are now in the trees. That's Butch, Cassidy, Sundance, and Etta shooting at them. Then as the police ride away and retreat, the music kicks in again as Butch says,
"Isn't that a pretty sight?" Well, we're back in business, boys and girls, just like the old days.
So this is now them maybe, Steve, just like feeling like they can make their way here in Bolivia. Things are starting to feel like they did back in America, don't you think?
It's so much fun. And it's funny. As I said before, I watched it with my son. I can never really predict what he is going to respond to and like. And this, again, he loves Raindrops Keeps Falling on My Head, which is not a song I necessarily thought he would love. When this music started playing, my son turned to me and said, "Why is this such a banger?" He loved this music cue, which I do too. Again, I don't think I loved it when I was younger, but now I do love it. It is so ridiculous.
All right, so the music we're hearing here, it's called South American Getaway, and is very influenced on a jazzy style musical genre known as Onda Nueva, which is the new wave, which was created by the Venezuelan author, composer, and musician Aldemaro Romero, who started to develop it in 1968. Onda Nueva is a fusion of Venezuelan joropo, which is folklore typical from certain regions of the country that mixes jazz and bossa nova. So the bossa nova theme and influence I certainly can hear, because that was a really big thing for Brazil, the bossa nova, the samba sound there. But having it mixed in with someone who's Venezuelan, I think we got a completely different approach to it, which I thought actually works well in the film, even if it seems a bit anachronistic.
I do find the music cue a little bit weird, where it continually goes from the fast tempo stuff into the slow tempo stuff, and it repeats that change multiple times in ways that I don't feel like it always works. However, more than any other sequence in the whole movie, you see Butch Cassidy, or Butch and Sundance, and Etta's genius, because every robbery is interesting and unique, and a different little game that they're playing to pull it off.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little background on the singers we're listening to, Steve. These are the Ron Hinkling Singers. They're a group of LA studio vocalists who were the real singers behind the background vocals for the Partridge Family.
Oh.
And the deep voice you hear every once in a while, bada, 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 is Thurl Ravenscroft, who was the voice behind the Tony the Tiger commercials for the Frosted Flakes, and the singer of You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, which I know for those
You're
of
a
us
mean one, Mr. Grinch.
Exactly. Those of us of a certain age, we know that voice.
All right, that is fantastic Cine-Files trivia right there. That's really cool.
The music continues as Sundance and Etta convince a bank manager to let them into their vault under the pretense that they have some valuables to be safeguarded. They head down to the vault, and as the manager joyfully opens a safe, Sundance pulls his gun from Etta's purse, and they rob the safe. And there's a great bit of physical comedy here. I don't know if you noticed this, Steve, but as the bank manager gets basically told to put his hands up, he only puts one hand up in surrender because the other hand is holding the keys, which I think is funny. Then they lock him behind the gate there as he gives them the locking keys, prompting a weird character exchange between Etta and Sundance, with Katherine Ross laughing. Steve, is this a improv moment that they left in the movie, or do you think George Roy Hill was like, yeah, let's do this to keep it kind of light for right now before we bring the curtain down harder on them in a little bit? What do you think about this moment?
Of course, I don't know the answer, but my gut is that it's an improv moment.
Yeah.
And I love the moment too, because Etta is the third wheel. She's not a criminal. She hasn't robbed banks or trains or anything in the United States.
Yeah.
And now they have folded her into it. And that moment where she smiles is she's never had so much fun in her life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's a great way to read that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I can accept that then. All right, as the music continues, because we're still playing this music, we see the police riding back out after them, and this time there are 7 of them, so the numbers are increasing, Steve, which essentially indicates that more and more people are getting upset by this happening. We cut to this small Bolivian town where an explosion happens in the distance, catching the attention of all the townspeople, except for 2 guys in the foreground of the screen. And as people finish running by them, it is revealed that these 2 men in the foreground are Butch and Sundance, who get up, pull their pistols, head into the bank to rob it, and the music kicks back in as more police come after them now, but they keep eluding them.
It's a totally fun sequence, and I think it's a necessary sequence because we needed some joy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like we had, and I think, again, there are a lot of weird things you have to do as a screenwriter or a filmmaker. And it's like, yeah, you have to tell your story. That's absolutely true. Right. You have to get all your pieces in place. You have to get shots. You have to get performances. You have to work on all that stuff. There's also an unconscious emotional rhythm in every movie.
Yeah.
And it has to be obeyed. You know what I mean? And so in addition to doing all that stuff, you have to go, all right, we just showed up in Bolivia. Butch was angry. We saw them fail and fail and fail and fail against the super posse.
Yeah.
We need to see them succeed. We need to feel why these guys are so great. before we're going to see them fail again, you know?
Yeah, we need to recapture their magic.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Steve, we cut to a close-up of dynamite on a safe as the music now just goes to the male singers there, basically a cappella, and then the dynamite explodes. Butch and Sundance take what's in the safe, and as Sundance looks behind him, the camera pans down to a guard who is tied up and gagged, and the camera goes up to see what the guard is looking at, and it is a wanted poster of Butch and Sundance that reads, Bandidos Yankees, with a picture of their faces, and Bandidos de los Estados Unidos below it. So clearly now, this is showing to us that Butch and Sundance are getting known across the country for the things that they're doing and are basically wanted now by the army and by the government.
This is the perfect filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
We just had our sequence to give us some joy, to make us feel like you're competent. And just at this moment where you think things are going to go good, well, you can't exist in a movie very long feeling like, hey, things are going great. As soon as things start going great, we got to give you a little hint that things are not going to stay great. And that is that shot of that wanted poster.
Absolutely. And we got to more police riding back and forth after them, implying that the trio are basically pulling multiple heists here. When we cut to the trio at a fancy restaurant, Steve, having dinner as the music plays over their conversation and laughter. And that's another thing about these sequences. There's no dialogue being spoken, but you're getting the idea of what's happening. And clearly this is something that also, if you read the historical stuff on Butch and Sundance, they did like to spend their money and have a good time, which is also one of the reasons why they were almost always out of money in their lives because of this. But we see them all toasting each other. The pheasant is brought out for them to survey and look at. But just then, Stephen, as you just said, as if the wanted poster wasn't enough, just then Butch just happens to look out one of the open areas at the restaurant, and he sees that white straw hat. So he's a small guy talking with some locals outside the restaurant. We never see the face, but we immediately know this could be Joe LeFors, and we immediately cut to the trio walking out of there with their luggage. So what an interesting way to plant Joe LeFors in that white hat earlier in the movie and then have it come back in this moment as he's talking to guys whose faces we can't really see, but are all in black, basically mirroring the super posse we had seen in America.
So when we were talking a little while ago, you said something about Joe LeFors in Bolivia.
Yes.
Is this Joe LeFors?
No.
Is Joe LeFors ever in Bolivia?
No.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
And when you said that, and it was funny. So when you said that, as we were talking, I went, I really want to know what William Goldman says in the script.
Yeah.
How does he describe this? And I have found it.
Oh,
this is what he says of the shot and the guy in the white hat. He says, it is dark, but not too dark to make out three men moving by the restaurant. The man in the middle wears a white skimmer, zoom to Butch, frantically saddling up his horse. That is all he says about this person.
Wow.
And I think this is so key to the movie. And of course, it could be Joe LeFors. I don't think it is. But what I love is just seeing a dude in a hat.
Yeah.
Just seeing a dude in a hat and not even getting a good look at him. Yeah. And they completely change everything they're going to do in their lives and possibly lead to their own deaths because of just a guy happening to wear a white skimmer.
And by the way, Joe LeFors was a very a formidable opponent for a lot of these criminals in the Old West. He ended up living until the age of 75. He was instrumental in obtaining the confession that led to the conviction of Tom Horn, a very famous gunman in 1903 for the alleged murder of a 14-year-old sheep herder named Willie Nickel. He did work for a number of companies in the Pinkertons and others who were pursuing bank robbers, but in nowhere in the biographies of him, Steve, did I find that he'd ever went to Bolivia. So this is just Butch, just kind of seeing this and immediately being afraid. And I think what you said just a few minutes ago is absolutely even more correct now, in that they never recover from the super posse. It is always in their head. And as soon as Butch sees that white straw hat, instead of going out to see if it's Joe LeFors, he immediately thinks it's Joe LeFors. And that's the end of the merriment at dinner.
Stay here, get him, and be done with it.
Yeah, but what if we lose? Saw him with two guys, but what if he's got 20?
You don't know for sure it's LeFors.
Hell of a guesser.
He can't arrest you here. It's a foreign country.
So that was something that I hadn't thought of in this moment as I was watching the movie, Steve, is that, Etta's like this voice of reason, this voice of logic here. I mean, how lost would they have been without Etta is fascinating to think about in the context of the movie, you know?
Totally screwed. I mean, they are children.
Yeah,
we love them. I mean, we adore these people. And, you know, it all goes to like, you know, these conversations we've been having for years of save the cat and this idea in Hollywood that you have to like people because they're good people, you know? And it's like, look, Butch and Sundance are not good people. They're not even responsible people. They're acting like children. They make stupid choices. Etta is the responsible one. Yeah. Does that mean we don't like Butch and Sundance? No, we adore Butch and Sundance.
And we like Etta too, because Etta's not nagging them. She's trying to help them. And I think that's what makes her a saving grace in the movie in that way. And, you know, I was doing some more research on the film here. And apparently William Goldman was really surprised when people said that the super posse to them symbolized the government. And especially thinking about it in the late 1960s, when this came out, Vietnam is happening. We've had riots in the streets. We've had the civil rights movement. We've had, you know, battles there about Vietnam and people turning on Vietnam, the government. Nixon comes into power. So there's the death of Kennedy, Johnson stepping down, the death of Robert Kennedy, so Martin Luther King. So there's a lot from the 60s heading into 69. And William said, I didn't write them to symbolize the government at all, is what Mr. Goldman said. But like, clearly, Steve, you can make that mean anything. You know, at times I felt like this is the impending coming of adulthood, because those two act like such children. They're trying to act like children until the last possible moment. Or as I said, the modernization, it can symbolize so many things in your life, this impending force that is coming for you because you know you've done wrong, you know?
It's funny. We've come across this many times of a director or a writer saying, this is what this means, or this is what I think this means. And then me going, I don't think that's what that means. Because I had never had the thought that you brought up of this is about adulthood and letting go of childish things.
Yeah.
It's a great metaphor for the movie. For me, the super posse has always been not necessarily the government, but the establishment.
Oh yeah.
The end of the old West, the establishment coming in and taking over. It has always meant that to me. And that fits, as you said, perfectly into 1969, the battle between the rebel and the government.
That's a great point. And Butch's reaction to seeing the hat is like what anybody would do when they see a person from the establishment, right? Like it's an official or a badge or anything. People have a reaction to it if they're trying to escape with something, or if they're afraid that they're going to abuse their power to hurt them. So, yeah.
He's got to wait for us, right? To pull another job? Well, what if there isn't another job? I mean, he can't arrest us and he can't take us out of here. We'll drive him crazy. We'll outlast the bastard. We'll go straight.
It's just so fun, and it's such a ridiculous plan. And I think it's also, and again, it's from the super posse. He came up with every single possible idea to get away from them, and they're still in their minds in the same situation, about to be chased again. We'll just go straight.
I've run out of all my options to escape them, so we'll just go straight now. Like essentially, they've herded them. You know, we see those things in scientific experiments where they kind of make the thing they're experimenting on make the decision for its own by locking off all the other areas it can go. They've Joe LeFors or the specter of Joe LeFors has essentially done that to Butch and Sundance. So now we cut to an old man looking at a rock, probably looking for gold or silver in that rock. This is Percy Garris.
You're from the U.S. of A. and you are seeking after employment.
Who is played by the great character actor and Western actor Strother Martin, who was in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Horse Soldiers, The Sons of Katie Elder, which I recently watched again over the weekend, Rooster Cogburn, Slapshot. I think he was the owner of the team in Slapshot, another Paul Newman film, Up in Smoke, The Champ with John Voight, and one of my favorite 70s body horror movies, which is that film where he is turning Dirk Benedict into a snake, from a human into a snake. He is the mean scientist. But of course, Steve, he's probably most famous for being in Cool Hand Luke as the captain of the prison with that famous line, "What we've got here is a failure to communicate." Another Paul Newman film that he was a part of. He was also in Silver Chalice, so he's worked a lot with Paul Newman in films, Strother Martin, but a great actor here coming in to do a really small part, Steve.
One of the great character actors of all time. And this is just one of those A supporting character comes in, completely steals the movie for about 10 minutes, and then is gone.
Yeah. So good. I mean, clearly he must have had a great relationship with Newman to work with him so much and so many things. So, and he must have trusted him. And he'd been working since the 50s. So this is a man who consistently worked his entire life until he passed away.
Ordinarily, you've got to wait to work for Percy Garris. But this ain't ordinarily. Bingo.
Hold on.
Yeah.
We have to discuss bingo.
Okay, let's go.
So,
bingo or Dammy? Which one do you want to discuss? Because they're both great.
So what I'm assuming is happening is that each time as he's chewing his tobacco, he is picking a target.
Yes.
Aiming at the target, spitting at the target, and if he hits the target, we get a bingo. Is that what's going on?
I think that's correct, yes. And when he misses, it's a Dammy. D-A-M-M-Y.
D-A-M-M-Y. That is hilarious. Oh, you know what? I have the script right up here. Is that one of the questions is this exactly in the script? Yep. So looking at this script, every single bingo and Dammy, they're all in here.
All right, so Bush responds and says, "You mean there are jobs?" And Percy says, "Yes, there are jobs. There are lots of jobs. Don't you want to know why?"
Because I cannot promise to pay you. Don't you want to know why?
Okay, why?
On account of the payroll thieves, fellow citizens. You see, every mine around gets its payroll from La Paz.
By the way, that's where my mother was born, La Paz.
Every mine around gets its payroll held up. Some say it's the Bolivian bandits, and some say that it's the banditos young keys. Could I see that?
So what do you think of this moment, Steve, when he's taking Sundance's gun? Are you thinking he's going to turn on them? Why does he want to look at Sundance's gun?
Well, how many people were walking around in the Old West carrying a nice 6-shooter on their hip and couldn't hit a damn thing?
That's a good point.
Percy he's arrogant. He's got it all figured out, and he knows these guys are fresh out of the old US of A, and that they probably don't know that much. And so two things are happening. One is we're seeing the disrespect that he's shown to Sundance and to Butch. And what that is building in us is the expectation, just like at the beginning of the movie, that, oh my God, Sundance is going to show, this guy doesn't know who he's messing with. Sundance is the most awesome, because we expect Sundance to succeed. And like all good movies, it doesn't give us what we expect.
Surely we're about to get to that, because Percy looks at the gun and says,
"Fairly nice looking piece. Can you hit anything?"
And Sundance, who we have seen hit a snake off a wall, rock wall, says kind of humbly,
"Sometimes."
Then Percy throws a rock out there and tells Sundance to hit the rock, and he hands the gun back to Sundance, who puts it in his holster.
No, son, I just want to know, can you shoot?
Sundance shoots. But to our surprise, as Steve kind of foreshadowed, he misses the rock. And Percy starts to walk away disappointed. Clearly, Butch and Sundance, Steve, are not getting these jobs.
And Butch's reaction to Sundance missing.
Yeah.
I don't think he's ever seen Sundance miss.
That's a good point. I hadn't noticed that he notices him. I thought maybe, like I said earlier in the first part, like, are they running a game on these people? But this is clearly like new territory for both of them.
Yeah.
So he doesn't even know so now he can't even finish Sundance's sentences anymore like he did at the beginning. They're so rattled by this new situation and the changes in their relationship that even Butch is surprised that Sundance can't shoot straight necessarily. So this is a new discovery. Great point, man.
Can I move?
Move? What the hell you mean move?
And Sundance then quickly gets into that crouch stance and hits the rock twice. Once off the ground and then in the air as it's flying through the air. And Percy is impressed. And Sundance, with a little bit of, how can I say this? A humble brag, says,
"Better when I move."
It's a perfect parallel. Like, we didn't, like, obviously the opening scene with Sundance shooting the belt off the guy is a setup for the character. But it's also a specific setup to this moment. Because A, he blows our expectations when he has to fire without moving.
Right.
And then B, it's exactly the same, which is at the beginning, the guy goes, "So Sundance, how good are," and before he can finish the sentence, Sundance is already drawing and firing. And here the same thing happens. He says, "Move? What the hell do you mean move?" And as he's mid-sentence, he does the exact same thing, goes into motion and shoots that rock.
Right. He stages it this way so that he is constantly, like, people are impressed by him because of the things he can do. You know
Oh,
what
well,
I'm
this
saying?
this is a question then. So,
Mhm.
did he miss that rock on purpose?
Yes.
No.
You don't think so?
I literally think that it's exactly what he says, is that he can't just stand still and hit something. He's
Yeah.
better when he's moving, when he's in motion.
Mm.
That which, by the way, makes perfect sense to me. I mean, it's like we've talked about this with acting, is that you're great in the moment when things are happening, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's harder to do it when it's just you have to manufacture it out of nothing.
I wonder if it holds up when we get to the shootout at the end, because
he's moving the whole
standing still
time
in a lot of moments.
But he's moving the whole time.
Not the whole time. So we'll see. We'll see.
Okay. All right.
Well, considering that I'm desperate and you are just what I'm looking for, on top of which you stem from the U.S. of A., we start tomorrow morning.
Me, we got jobs.
Payroll guard.
So this is actually what happened. They did become payroll guards in Bolivia to try to go straight, but it didn't work out. They just could not do regular jobs. One of the stories on Butch is that he tried to work a job as a waiter when he was when he was coming out and doing things and what have you. But apparently he was so nervous about being a waiter, he kept missing the cups when he was pouring and stuff. And like they had to take him in the back and try to like build up his confidence. It was a whole thing for Butch Cassidy, because he either for whatever mental reasons, either not wanting to work a regular job or working a job like that where people are looking at him as he's trying to pour liquid into a cup was clearly an issue for him. So this is a fascinating situation that they go straight. By the way, a little bit of trivia for this guy, Percy. He was based on Percy Siebert, who is a miner that Butch and Sundance befriended after robbing a bank and fleeing the country. When they head to Chile, they meet Percy Siebert in Chile, and he is apparently the inspiration for this character. So taking out of a little bit of real life to put in here. I don't know if he had this accent or he sang or do anything, but he was certainly the inspiration. Anyways, I say we cut to Percy singing as he rides a horse, leading Butch and Sundance over some Bolivian hills, and he's singing about Sweet Betsy from Pike.
Across the high mountains with her lover Ike.
While Butch and Sundance behind him are arguing about where the ambush might be coming from, being super eager about their job, Steve.
The bushes on the left.
I'm telling you, they're in the trees up ahead.
You take the trees, I'll take the bushes.
Will you two beginners cut it out?
Well, we're just trying to spot an ambush, Mr. Garris.
Moron. I've got morons on my team. Nobody is going to rob us going down the mountain. We have got no money going down the mountain. When we have got the money on the way back, then you can sweat.
I think we've established that Paul Newman and Robert Redford are the coolest of the cool.
Yes.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid are the coolest of the cool. They are awesome in every way. Not in every way. Calling those super cool dudes morons.
Yes.
It makes this movie so good.
Yeah.
And they are acting like morons.
Yeah.
They're literally acting like morons. I mean, it's great.
Again, when you humanize these kinds of characters, Steve, it's so important because the audience immediately loves them even more. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they head on down the hill. We cut to a bank with money being brought out to the teller, and the camera pans to Butch and Sundance outside the bank.
We hit this place in June, didn't we?
And Sundance can't seem to remember, is really racking his mind trying to remember if they did it or not. And Percy walks out with the money and asks for Jones's help. Steve, who the hell is Jones? And we find out that Butch and Sundance have changed their surnames to Smith and Jones, as nondescript as it gets, brother.
I love, who am I, Smith or Jones?
Yeah.
Do you remember the show Alias Smith and Jones?
No, what was that show?
It's a mid 70s Western called Alias Smith and Jones, which I can only assume was inspired by this movie.
Wow, I did not know that. I'm gonna look that up real quick because I want to have some idea on that. Alias Smith and Jones, huh? Oh wow! So as Steve has kind of steered me into this, Alias Smith and Jones, created by Glenn A. Larson, starring Ben Murphy, and Roger Davis was the narrator on this. So interesting. Yeah, you're right. It seems like it was inspired by Butch and Sundance. Fascinating. So they head back with Percy and the money back over the hills, debating about where they might be ambushed all over again.
About a half hour more and we can start to worry. As soon as we get to that pass up there, we'll be all right till then.
Goes on about Bolivia and being an American in Bolivia and how he's been down there for 10 years and how colorful he is as a character. Well, I hope you enjoyed Percy in the movie because he is immediately shot in the heart as all this gunfire rings out and Butch and Sundance jump for cover as poor old Percy is immediately killed there in this sequence here, Steve. What a surprise. I mean, I'd forgotten that he gets offed this quickly in the movie.
Yeah, it's really shocking, and it's just because again, we've messed with our expectations in multiple ways. We mess with it because Sundance misses.
Yes.
Then we mess with it coming down the hill where they're anticipating an ambush before they have the money. Then we mess them again. They don't even remember if they're Smith or Jones. But we're still going, look, Sundance is still a badass. I mean, there's still going to be good protection.
Right.
And they completely fail. Like the guy gets killed out of nowhere and then that's just done. It's shocking, you know?
So let me ask you a question. Let me ask a Steve Morris question. As we said earlier in the conversation, Butch was known for being a meticulous planner of bank robberies. So why would he worry about being ambushed before they have the money if he's such a smart, meticulous planner? Is this because they've never been bank guards, they've never been on the other side of it? Or is this just William Goldman taking a little bit of liberty to throw in some comedy that ends up being shockingly stopped by the death of Percy on the way back?
I think the answer is yes. I think it's William Goldman coming up with some comedy.
Okay.
But I also think it's theoretically, if you spend your time robbing banks, you must be pretty good at protecting banks.
Yeah.
But I mean, in general, when you take a smart, talented person in one realm and stick him into another realm, it's funny. I'm going to not make this a huge digression, but there's the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is about your ability to judge your ability to things. And there's like a corollary to it, which is frequently people that are really good at one thing assume that the thing that they're really good at means they'll be really good at all sorts of things.
Yeah.
You know, and we see this all the time of like, hey, this person is a brilliant brain surgeon, so they must be able to, solve homelessness, because they're good at one thing. And so Butch's skill at one thing, he has not really thought through the whole process from the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. We see that with a lot of athletes who think they can become actors. Travis Kelce, the most recent one, for sure. All right, as Butch and Sundance run for cover from this hail of gunfire, Sundance then grabs the money, and we see poor Percy there with the hole right in his heart and the blood there, grabs the money, tosses it to Butch, who then tosses it over the rocks, which allows them to get away to safety. And later we cut to the people who were shooting them, which is a bunch of these Bolivian bandidos who are counting and divvying up the money when the leader of the group looks up to see Butch and Sundance looking down on them. So the robbers are getting robbed, Steve, for this money.
So many interesting things about this. The first of which is that we don't see them make the decision to come back.
Oh, yeah. We don't. You're right.
We just skip to the robbers, the banditos, and then we see them show up.
Yeah.
Here's my question for you.
Okay.
They're two, and these both could be true.
Yeah.
But one motivation for them coming is to get the money because Butch and Sundance are crooks and there's money available.
Yes.
Another motivation is the genuine feeling of guilt that their job was to protect this guy's life and they failed to do it.
Yes.
Like, what do you think is motivating them to come back to these robbers?
I think it's the Percy situation. Like, this guy took a chance on them. And I think it's their fear that if they can't go straight, Joe's going to come after them. They need to get the money. And so I think that's the motivation, because the entire next sequence and exchange here is all about getting the money from these bandidos back, because they're saying it's not our money. We have to return it. And so for me, I think that was the motivation. Like, if we get the money, we can keep our jobs. Maybe we'll get a new boss, but they won't blame us for this. Right. And I think that was the motivation in coming back, because clearly they don't keep the money. So that's the thing. That's what I think is the motivation. What about you?
That's what I think too. I think I do think there's strong amounts of guilt that is motivating, because Butch is not a killer. This is what we're going to get to in the scene.
Exactly.
So for them to go do this that has to be motivated by guilt and a sense of failure.
For sure.
I don't know that they give back the money. We don't see them give back the money.
I would think they would want to, so they don't get caught, or else they would just ride away. Don't you think?
Well, they do just right away. We don't know what happens after this scene, other than the fact that they go back to being criminals again. So now, but based on how it's set up and us saying that they're doing it out of guilt, my gut is maybe they do give back the money, but it's not shown in the movie.
No, you're right. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
Tell them to leave the money and go.
Dejen el dinero.
He says that totally wrong. It's dinero.
Dinero and y vayanese.
And then the gang leader says, que dejemos el dinero y nos vayamos. And so basically he's saying, wait, you're telling us to leave the money and get on out of here?
Well, I like that he's correcting his Spanish too.
Yes.
Is this what you're trying to say?
Again, right? And this is very reminiscent, right, of Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Totally, yeah.
Right? The back and
we don't need
forth
no
here.
stinking badges.
Yeah, exactly. And it's getting close to caricature, but it doesn't quite go into caricature, because we do get an interesting end to this particular sequence, which I want to hear your thoughts on.
Tell them we're hired to take it back. It's our job. Tell them the money isn't ours.
El dinero no es nuestro.
And the leader said, no, it's not yours. He basically says this in Spanish. No, ya no es de ustedes. Ahora es de nosotros. And so he's basically saying, you're right. Yeah, the money isn't yours. It's ours now. So he confirms. So there's a little bit of a comedic beat. And now they realize they're going to have to get into a gunfight with these guys.
What do you think? Not so good. Can you take the two on the right?
And here we go, Steve, which is something you've been teasing since the beginning when we've been talking about Butch.
Kid, there's something I think I ought to tell you. I never shot anybody before.
And now this is the reverse, right, of the moment on the cliff.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't thought about that. But
right?
yes, it is.
Sundance
Totally.
has never told Butch he can't swim. And here is Butch revealing to Sundance that he's never shot anybody. At the most critical moments of their situations, they're revealing these things about each other.
Well, this is also part of why it's interesting that we didn't see them make this decision. Because if you're making the decision, we're going to just straight up confront, 5 guys, 6 guys?
Yeah, 5 guys. Yeah.
5 guys, just stand in front of them.
Yeah.
Butch at that point would probably have said, hey, I've never shot anybody. To wait until you're standing in front of them to give them this piece of information. And I love Redford's response. Hell of a time to tell me.
Hell of a time to tell me. So the leader responds, vale más que se hagan un lado porque a lo mejor los matan. So basically he's saying, you guys need to stand aside or we're going to kill you.
Try for the two on the right. Go for them dead center. That way, if you miss a little, you'll still hit something.
Go. Hey. Please. Hey. Por favor.
Por favor.
And then, boom, this gunfight breaks out, and they essentially kill all 5 of them. And Steve, I want to get your thoughts on this. Butch and Sundance do shoot first, and then they kill all of them as we hear one of them scream loudly as he falls in slow motion, which really unsettles the comedy that had been laid out between these, Butch and Sundance and these bandidos. So why do you think George Roy Hill chose to show the blood and the violence and have us hear the scream of a dying man falling in slow motion onto the ground?
It is a heavy moment. It's the heaviest moment in the film by far. It's heavier, I think, even than the ending of the film. And so one thing I'd read, by the way, was that they had this idea of overclocking and underclocking the film so that I think they shot this both in fast motion and slow motion and was going to superimpose all of this together in some way. And they did it. And what George Roy Hill said is it looked amazing and didn't work. And so they just went with the slow-mo version, which I find, and again, this is one of the interesting things about filmmaking is filmmaking frequently is an experiment.
Yeah.
You try stuff, and then when it doesn't work, then it just doesn't go in the movie, and that's okay. I think people often think about, oh, if I did it wrong, I must have failed, and if it didn't work, I failed. And it's like, no, you learned and you succeeded. You didn't use it; it didn't work. Yeah. The thing about, I think this tracks perfectly with what we've been discussing in terms of monitoring the tone of the film. is like, oh, things are bad with the super posse. They get to a low point when we get to Bolivia. Then things are really, really fun. Then we see LeFors. Then we have this death of Strother Martin, which is really heavy.
Yeah.
And then we have this super heavy moment. And I think it's critical to the movie because if we don't have this moment, I don't think we're prepared for the end of the film. I think this is like telling you, no, this is, it's been all fun and games, sure.
Yeah.
But this actually is deadly serious. And we are heading in a deadly serious direction.
Well, we've gone straight. What do we try now?
It's such an interesting moment, right, Steve?
It's you've literally gone, here are two guys that avoided killing anybody ever as criminals.
Yeah.
When they were criminals, nobody died and it was a lot of fun.
Yes.
And when they go straight, the guy they're protecting gets killed and then they kill a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I know. Well, we cut to later in the night, and as Etta is pouring them coffee, she says,
There are other ways of going straight, you know. There's farming.
I don't know how to farm.
What about a ranch, then?
Last time we tried ranch was during our rustling days. And even then we weren't much good at it.
which is ironic because Steve in Butch Cassidy's history that he did try to be a rancher and it didn't work out for him as a young man. I think Sundance also did it for a bit and couldn't find much success at it. So I like that they're throwing in for like those people who are really huge historical buffs of these guys, these little allusions, like these little nods or winks that to call back the historical truth about these characters in these moments, you know?
It also goes, I think, to your point of that these are on some levels children because who believe they can't change. Like, no, I'm this. I can't grow. I can't evolve. I can't become a grown up.
I tried what you're asking me to do. I can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you didn't try hard enough. I say to my son all the time, you got to try again.
That sounds like my dad. Get up. Oh, all right. Then the camera pans from Butch to Etta. So we see that even Etta might be getting close to done with this life, Steve. We talked about her like taking a break from her responsibilities, having a fun lark. And certainly she says that. I got nothing here. I'm at the bottom of the barrel in my life. But the brutal reality that this fun escape from her adult life has real life consequences, I think is starting to hit her. And we see it in Katherine Ross's face. And we fade to them sleeping out in the field that night.
Yeah. I think, well, and again, how good screenwriting works.
Yeah.
The line before they left, I'm not going to watch you die, is critical to what is about to happen. That's where her brain is.
I might go back ahead of you.
And she says it really quietly. She's not asking for permission.
Nope.
But she's saying it in a way that's trying not to offend Sundance, but making it very kindly clear, sweetly clear that she's done.
The most interesting part of this line is ahead of you.
Yeah, ahead of them. Yeah.
Because it implies that they are planning to head back to the United States at some point.
Right.
Does she believe, and are they actually planning to go back to the United States?
It's a great question because I think she wants to believe that they're heading back because I think they've had conversations that we haven't seen in the movie where they talk about heading back at some point, where the heat dies down and what have you. And they're trying to go straight. So I think she's speaking into the fantasy that they're going to head back to the States at some point. And that's the softest way to get him and Butch to allow her to go and to not have any issues with it, right? Women who are listening to us, I'm sure you've been in situations or relationships with men where you have to couch how you say certain things so they don't get upset, try to stop you from doing something, or try to keep you in a place you don't want to be at anymore. And I think the way this is written, this is why Goldman is such a fantastic writer. You can relate to what she's saying and how she's saying it. She's indulging in the fantasy, but at the same time making a case for herself to get out of there. You know,
great screenplays are like icebergs in this way, and in particular, there's a synchronicity between the things that are left unsaid and the work of the actor and the director, I think. Because that line, I might go back ahead of you.
Yeah.
I agree 100% with you. I think they have vaguely said things about, when we go back to the States and someday the heat will die down and LeFors and they've just kind of said stuff like that. And so just that line ahead of you gives the actor all of this backstory to play with, to fill out their performance. And it gives the audience all these things to go like, well, what exactly does that mean? And again, I agree completely with you, is that she might hopefully believe that there's some future in which she might be back with Sundance or Butch and Sundance.
Right.
But deep down, she knows that there isn't. And deep down, they know there isn't either.
In the context of the movie, I think you're 100% correct.
Whatever you want, Etta.
Maybe I'll go.
Hey. Etta's thinking of maybe going home ahead of us.
And Butch gives the same response.
Whatever she wants.
And Etta says quietly,
I'll go then.
and that's that. And that's the last time we see Etta in the movie. But I want to ask you, Steve, like Butch and Sundance, when they left America, Sundance is really clear. You whine, you cry, you anything. I'm going to dump you in a heartbeat. This is a different Sundance. This is a different Butch. They're both rattled by the situation. They can't get out of this situation. The impending nature of LeFors, whether real or imagined, is bearing down on them. And they very kindly let Etta go because they do love her and they don't want her to be killed or get involved with their situation anymore.
I think it's an amazing scene. And this is why good screenwriting is magical. Yeah. It's so few words. There's so little that's said about their relationships and all of the, Etta's thinking of going, whatever she wants, like all of that. It's so rich and filled with emotion. And again, from Strother Martin's death to killing of the bandits to this moment, there is a profound sense of doom coming.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been avoiding it and avoiding it and avoiding it, but it has found us, you know, and clearly we are now on the path to the end of the film. This is like Goodfellas, like when the feds are finally on to Leota in the last 20, 25 minutes of the movie. It is now really going to happen, so to speak. For people who are wondering what happened to Etta Place, she does head back to the United States and then disappears. There are no more records of Etta Place after she returns back to the States. So I do want to give a quick shout out to Katherine Ross and give you guys a little bit of information because the last time we're going to see her in the movie. So what do they call this? A martini shot for Katherine Ross?
This is a wrap. This is a wrap.
This is a wrap. Everyone thought this is the wrap. But on the first day of shooting, this is an interesting story. On the first day of shooting on the movie, which involved the train robbery scenes, Katherine Ross came to the set to watch. There were 5 cameras that Conrad L. Hall was using, the cinematographer, but only 4 operators. So he put her on the extra camera.
Wow.
Steve, you know this. This is a big deal on a movie set to hand a novice and an actor access to a camera to shoot something. And George Roy Hill, from all the reading and research I did for the movie, this is a bellicose, strong-armed guy who wants, kind of like a John Ford type, who wants things his way. Well, Conrad showed Katherine Ross how to operate the camera and how to move it to get the shot that he was looking for. When George Roy Hill found out, because apparently he didn't see her do this, he was furious, said nothing the whole day, but at the end of the day, he banned her from the set except when she was working. But clearly something happened that day because Katherine Ross ended up marrying Conrad Hall, the cinematographer on the movie. Yes.
Wow.
And this is how they probably met and made this connection with each other. And this was so they married in 1969. So like June 1st. So they were there and then married until 1974. And who does she marry 10 years after Conrad Hall? Sam Elliott in 1984.
Really?
And this is Sam Elliott's film debut. He is one of the cowboys in one of the opening sequences of the movie.
Okay. This is why. So this is such a joy for me to be in this position and just learn this at this moment. That I knew none of that. That is all amazingly cool.
Yeah.
That is super cool. The having her run a camera, and I would never have an actor who's never handled a film camera run a film camera because it's very complicated and it takes some skill.
Unless you have a thing for her. I don't know.
You know what?
Go ahead.
It's not a bad point.
If Katherine Ross looks to you, I'm gonna let her use the camera. I'm gonna be fair with you.
Hoover, who I did the documentaries with, this was a thing he did all the time, which is he would just hand a video camera to someone working on the movie or someone who was there or one of the divers or something like that and said, hey, why don't you shoot? And I saw what would happen was the person would become suddenly engaged and totally excited and thrilled and committed to the movie in this new way, because and the experience of like, no, I trust you with this.
Yeah.
Is really, really cool. And so it's something that I've started to do is like, just go, hey, well, why don't you do this? And and it doesn't matter if a little bit of the footage is good, you don't have anyone running that camera anyway. So I wouldn't do it with film. Film is expensive. That's the problem with film, whereas video's not. But like, I think it's a really interesting technique. And I also, I go with George Roy Hill kicking her off the set. I was like, what a dick,
Well, he wanted him things his way,
I can't believe I'm still a little rocked by Conrad Hall and Sam Elliott being on the set, being her two husbands. That's amazing.
2 out of 5.
2 out of 5.
She was married 5 times, bro.
Well done.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I do want to say one thing for those of you who may think you haven't seen Katherine Ross other than The Graduate. I bet there's a lot of you who've seen Donnie Darko. She plays Dr. Lillian Thurman in Donnie Darko. So that may shock some of you who are listening to us who maybe didn't know that it was the same actress who played that character. All right, so Steve, we cut to the sunlight coming through the trees near a creek. This is like a beautiful shot from Conrad Hall, Mr. Katherine Ross, as some Bolivians ride through on their horses, and we hear the rare sound cue. Remember, George Roy Hill did not like sound cues when there was action, or so clearly playing here as the horses are coming up, when suddenly Butch and Sundance rob them, but they find very little. Again, these little signposts that let us know that there's something dreadful coming.
I tell you, no more jungle work for me.
You're getting to be an old maid. Keep your old maid remarks to yourself if you don't mind.
The people being robbed recognize that they are the Bandidos Yankees, and Sundance shuts them up at Butch's behest. So the frustration is growing. Now Butch is grousing. Whereas Sundance was the one grousing, now we see Butch grousing, and it's Sundance who's having to kind of talk him into pulling these little robberies and doing these things. But clearly the cracks are starting to show from Butch's side as well.
Well, in that moment of them recognizing the Banditos Yankees is like, oh, it's, and this is also where I'm sure you do this too. Whereas like I'm watching and going, I kind of know how long the movie is.
Yeah.
And I know how long it's been going. And I'm like, okay, stuff's about to happen.
Something's about to happen. And we cut to Butch and Sundance riding into town to get something to eat. They're still arguing about jungle work, and apparently snakes are an issue for Butch, which I wonder if this was an influence for Indiana Jones.
Sure.
12 years later. This young kid, Juan, takes the horses, who I think is the son of the guy who owns the restaurant, shall I say cafe, for lack of a better term, that they're eating at. And we see clearly in close-up that there is an A brand on one of the white horses that they rode in on.
I don't enjoy jungles, and I don't enjoy swamps. I don't like snakes. I don't much care for night work. Bitch.
Sundance of all people says to Butch, bitch. Are you kidding me?
Bitch is something that I've said many times.
But they're clearly falling apart, man.
Yeah.
Juan runs in to the captain's office. As captain there, it says this in Spanish, there in the plaza is a mule from the Alpoca mines.
A sign of good screenwriting and good directing and good editing is that you can have scenes entirely in a language that the audience does not understand.
Yes.
And know exactly what's happening.
Yeah. Like, I was surprised there wasn't English subtitles.
You don't need them.
Yeah.
The storytelling is perfect.
Understand what's happening. Yeah. And just as we're seeing that scene, his father, Juan's father, brings out this stew, thanks Butch and Sundance for patronizing his place.
The specialty of the house, and it's still moving.
So they can't even have a meal that they enjoy anymore, Steve. That's been stripped away from them. Just then a shot rings out at them at the table, and Butch and Sundance run for cover.
Well, that settles it. This place gets no more of my business. What do you think? Let it just one guy.
Which prompts Sundance to put his hat out, and it gets shot multiple times. And without missing a beat, Sundance says to Butch,
"Don't you get sick of being right all the time?"
It's so funny, and it's so the moment of him putting the hat out and it getting shot is like you already knew. And what's interesting is like if you don't know the history of Butch and Sundance, which most of the people in 1969 probably didn't know.
No, they did not know. Yeah.
And you don't know, and you've watched a lot of Westerns with John Wayne, and you know that these guys are the heroes. I don't think it occurs to you that they're not going to make it out of this movie alive.
Right.
But we've had sort of the build of the sense of doom and the just strolling into town in the middle of this, where they're going to be recognized. When he puts that hat out, I think you're starting to go, oh shit, what's going to happen here? You know?
They might finally be overmatched.
Yep.
Right. So we see these, for lack of a better term, policemen now shooting from the rooftops, which forces Butch and Sundance out of where they were. They run to a door, but then shots ring out at the door, forcing them to head back to a table that they flip over.
Reloading. That's all I got.
We're gonna run out unless we can get to that mule and get some more. I'll go.
This is no time for bravery. I'll let you.
But just as the laughs are dying down from that line, Butch also realizes that he can't give Sundance cover because, Steve, we planted that he's not a good shot. He's not a person who's used his weapon to kill other people other than just recently.
You can see I'm right, can't you?
You go.
Why am I always so damn smart?
It's so great, and I love as they head out in this sequence. That anytime a movie shows competence, I love it. And what you see, even though we're feeling a sense of doom and we're feeling that they're outmatched, is what you see is these guys are really good and they move together really well. And they both, despite the fact that they've been bickering and irritated with each other since coming to Bolivia, they're also still deeply and profoundly in sync and get each other and know and want to protect each other. It's a great, great sequence as he goes for the mule.
Butch takes off, making his way around the market. Sundance takes out two of the soldiers. He's moving around, Steve, sure, but he's also standing still behind some cover there. And there's a pause as Sundance reloads, and then Butch takes off towards the horses and the mule as we see more soldiers coming around. Butch finally makes it to the mule and the horses and grabs the ammo as the bullets are getting closer to Sundance, who kills 3 more soldiers. So we're really getting to see how lethal Sundance is with his pistols. Butch rides in between the horse and the mule, but they get shot out from him as he gets to Sundance, leaving him exposed. And as he runs for cover, he gets shot from behind. Sundance runs out to give him cover so Butch can stumble to safety, but as he does so, Sundance is shot a couple of times as well, and they both stumble into a building. And now, Steve, I think we cannot deny what is happening. Now, the thing we feared the most, as you said earlier in the just a few minutes ago in the film, we were sensing the dread. Now the thing we dreaded has come to pass here in the film.
So there is a thing. I've referenced this movie many times, this moment in this movie many times in the course of the Cine-Files.
Yeah.
And what I realized as we were prepping for it, because of course I knew I was going to bring it up, was I was like, you know what? This little piece of filmmaking information might be the origins of my cinephile-ness. Because it might very well be that Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is the first or among the first times that I listened to a commentary track or watched a behind the scenes or something like that. And it is where I picked up this filmmaking tidbit that I always found fascinating, which is I remember from way back in the day, George Roy Hill saying that he was meticulously careful about counting every single round and making sure that Sundance reloaded so that it was exactly 6 shots, and he always used 6 shots so that in this final sequence, he can shoot off 12 shots without reloading and we will never notice, because he is established for the audience that we're handling this really, really realistically. And because he's established that so well, now he could abandon realism. And I always found that to be like that's one of the first clues where I went, oh, it's not just that you're telling the story. There's a weird magic to directing. There's weird things that you're doing that nobody's ever going to notice, that's putting their brains and their emotions in a certain space to enjoy the movie. And then as we're prepping for this and you were doing all the research, I went, oh shit, what if this isn't true? What if I've misremembered this from 1989 or 1993 or whenever I saw the Laserdisc or whatever this was?
Right.
And so I went back and I checked it. It is in fact true. George Roy Hill did say this, and I did count all the rounds to make sure exactly the moment that he's being honest and then stops being honest with the audience. And I just find that I've always found that a fascinating little piece of directing.
That's a great piece of tidbit of information for sure.
Is that what you call giving cover? Is that what you call running? If I knew you were gonna stroll. You never could shoot, not from the very beginning. And you were all mouth.
So to me, I read these lines as I love you. We're about to die.
Say the same thing. That's exactly what I think.
Yeah. I love you. We're about to die. And I'm sorry for everything, but I wouldn't have done it with anyone else. That's what I read in these lines. And maybe I'm reading too much, but that's what I feel.
No, it's exactly. And I'm so glad you said it because I was wondering. I thought you might have been going in the opposite direction, that they're really mad at, because they've been bickering since Bolivia,
right?
And the bickering's all real, But like, to me, I'll tell you the scene that I've always related this to, and that is John McClane pulling glass out of his feet in Die Hard.
Yeah, talking to Reginald Vell Johnson.
Is that at that moment, John McClane knows the odds are he's going to die.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about other things.
Right.
And like, that's what this scene is like, it's real damn clear we're going to die, but we're still, and the thing too, as they're kind of getting ready to go back out and, Sundance is putting a gun in Butch's hands and they're bandaging and other stuff. Despite the fact that all they're doing is bickering, physically, all they're doing is so tender and loving with each other.
Yeah.
It's so caring. And it's just, and again, it goes back to like this weird threesome relationship with Etta, is that we're never going to define exactly what the love is between Butch and Sundance.
Right.
But there is love here, like real love, true love,
Yeah. And I want to make this clear, and I don't want to offend anybody, but to me, it's two guys who care about, who love each other. Yeah. I don't think it's a homosexual in any way.
No, I think
it's just these two guys love each other and they're brothers. They're really brothers, and as you said in the first part, they're the yin and yang of each other. And together they make one great man. That's who Etta's in love with, which is why, in essence, she's dating them both in a way. So when you see them having these back and forths, we as men, this is very much a men moment.
Yeah.
All ball busting and playfully jabbing to take away from the fear of the situation. And in a way, the ball busting is essentially confirming like the care and respect you have for the other person. So
exactly.
This might be a newsflash for some of you. Men aren't that good with emotion. And this is the best. Sometimes it's the best we can do in these situations.
Well, it's funny. Yeah. I mean, yes, I agree. Of course I agree with that. But I also go, this is better sometimes.
Yeah. Yes.
Sometimes it's better. Yes, they could say, I've always loved you and I've always thought of you as a brother. Yeah. It's certainly better filmically. Like in general, people just truly expressing their honest emotions in the moment is not actually what makes good movies work. What makes good movies work is saying you could never shoot. Like that's actually that way of saying I love you is like an amazing movie moment.
Yeah.
Saying if Butch had turned to Sundance and said, you know what, I've always loved you, you'd be like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, then it becomes No Way Out when Will Patton does that to Gene Hackman, and that is super creepy.
Yeah.
All right. So we see a soldier tell the sergeant or chief that the army has arrived. The sergeant goes out to talk to the army captain, who is shocked that they've been called out to handle two guys. This reminded me of the running scared moment when they call up to Billy Crystal, who was imitating Dan Hedaya, about getting the cocaine out for the two guys. And he says, 2 guys? $100 million worth of coke for 2 guys? But then when they say when the sergeant says the Bandidos Yankees, the army captain completely changes his attitude, dispatches his soldiers into positions. And there are a lot of them, Steve, moving into those positions. And it is not looking good for Butch and Sundance.
I mean, talk about the understatement of the century. I mean, like it's because you already felt a sense of doom at the hat moment, and you see there's a whole, there's a lot of guys already.
Yeah.
When the fucking army shows up.
Yeah.
Then you just go, oh, yeah, they're doomed. They're doomed. There is no the army is saying they have 0 chance,
Right.
And this is what was so weird. Again, I can't understand what my son's reactions to things are. This is the moment when the army showed up is when he turned to me and said, I'm so fucking bored. And I'm like, dude, I don't understand. This is one of the great movies. But he loved Seven Samurai, which I took him to. It's like he handled the 3.5 hour black and white movie and subtitles, but Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, he found boring.
You're going to have to let this go. You know, art is subjective. We've been saying that for 8 years on this show. My father fell asleep during Braveheart, stayed awake during the entire 4.5 run of Hamlet with Kenneth Branagh. I will never understand it. I will never understand it. And it was at the exact same times on different days. Right. So I will never understand it. All right. So now we have some more back and forth with Butch and Sundance. Butch says, I got a great idea where we should go next. Sundance is like, I don't want to hear it.
Change your mind when I tell you.
Shut up.
Okay.
Your great ideas at God is.
Forget about it.
I don't ever want to hear another one of your ideas, all right?
All right.
I love the pause.
Yes.
Where you see Butch really, really wants to tell him and finally just can't wait anymore and says, Australia.
And he says, I figured secretly you wanted to know, so I told you.
That's your great idea.
Oh, boy, it's the latest in a long line.
Australia's no better than here.
Oh, that's all you know.
Name me one thing.
They speak English in Australia.
What's so fun? And again, we just saw the army showed up.
Yeah.
You know, so we know there's no Australia. I mean, we probably would have known there's no Australia before the army showed up, but now we definitely know there's no Australia. And yet, maybe in some ways, this is the part of the heart of the movie. Butch and Sundance are going to continue to be Butch and Sundance right up until the very last moment.
Yeah. They're defiant to the end.
Yeah.
Defiant to which is why this movie is so beloved, I think, by a lot of people, because they stay defiant to the end. Whether the super posse or the soldiers represent the government or the police or the establishment or impending adulthood or whatever it is that they could, or the modernization, they are going to stay who they are to the end. We all know those people who don't want to dive in to the world of technology and electronics, want to unplug all the time, go out into the woods. Those are how certain people are built that way, that they don't want to go with the rest of the herd. They don't want to go with other people. And there's a bit of respect for that because it takes a lot of work to be defiant to what everyone else wants to do.
Yep.
You know, I'm not saying you should rob banks. I'm just saying you can express defiance.
You heard it here first, Cine-Files. We do not endorse bank robbing.
We do not. People still do that nowadays.
Got horses in Australia. Hell, they got thousands of miles we could hide out in. A good climate, nice beaches. You could learn to swim.
No, swimming isn't important.
I think there are few more powerful star turns than Redford in this movie.
100%. Yeah, people should know that. No, he was not that well known. Newman had to fight for him to be on the movie.
Well, and like Newman is a major movie star for like 15 years before this.
Yes.
And Sundance and Redford comes in and goes completely toe to toe with him. And moments like, no, swimming's not important. It's so great. And you're like, oh, he emerges like from the chrysalis, fully evolved as a movie star at Newman's equal. I don't think you like from this moment forward, 100%. It's Newman and Redford. Yeah, they're equals. That's
100%.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you don't cast McQueen. Like I said, happy accidents. We know this, Steve, happen in movies all the time. Sometimes the happy accident is when the big movie star doesn't say yes. And it opens the door for someone else to step in. I think McQueen in no way would have played second fiddle to Newman. There's no way he would have done it quite as Robert Redford did. Even in Magnificent Seven, McQueen stands out on his own for the things that he does. And so I don't think he could have played these moments quite the same way. Not that McQueen couldn't have done the film. Sure. I just don't think you would have had the same chemistry and magic and joy that you have between Redford and Newman. You know?
I think you put your finger on it with the word second fiddle, which is, I think, from what I know about Steve McQueen, there is only first fiddle and second fiddle. Whereas, you know what I mean? Somebody has to be the alpha dog and someone is not the alpha dog. What's great about Butch and Sundance is they're together. There is no second fiddle.
Right.
You don't go Redford is the assistant or Sundance is the assistant to Butch Cassidy. Right. They are 100%. This is a duo. You know, that's what this is. And McQueen can't do that.
No, and listen, it's not to denigrate McQueen. Go and do the research.
No,
McQueen at this time in the late 60s is very, very cocky and believes in himself very strongly. And one of the pitches they made, which I haven't revealed at all yet in our conversations, is one of the pitches they made when they were trying to get McQueen to say yes is they were going to split up the credit in terms of prints. And by that I mean one of the because Newman was such a big star, McQueen was becoming this big star, so wanted equal billing. And so they came with the studio said, well, here's what we'll do. We'll split the prints in half, and in one of the prints, McQueen is listed first in the credits, and in the other half of the prints, Newman is listed first, and we'll send them out that way. That's how they thought to convince McQueen to be a part of a movie, and his people came back and said, no, either he's first billing or he's not on this movie. So what you're saying is absolutely correct.
First of all, that's crazy. And second of all, it's funny that you mentioned that because one of my favorite podcasts is called 99% Invisible. And it's just a fantastic podcast that I highly, highly recommend. And I think this was on 99% Invisible. One of its most recent episodes was about credits. And in particular, they were talking about how every credit and whether you're the and introducing or with and each the meaning of this and featuring, how big it is on the screen. And if you're sharing the screen and all this stuff that agents and managers and studios argue about, all this stuff is that the film Outrageous Fortune with Shelley Long and Bette Midler did exactly what you're just describing, which is on the West Coast, it was Shelley Long and Bette Midler. And on the East Coast, they redid all the packaging and all the prints to be Bette Midler and Shelley Long second. Like, that is just and you can find copies of the VHS that is one way or the other way to satisfy these two people or their agents, more likely.
Oh, the 80s. Because both of those would kill to be leads in a movie now.
Right.
So we have this exchange about the women and the banks being ripe and luscious.
Banks are the women.
And then Butch, I think, says a line that will influence rap songs for the rest of time.
Well, once you got one, you got the other.
Certainly Scarface says, first you get the power, then you get the woman. And then a lot of rap artists have come afterwards and used that as a lyric in their songs. So Butch is the original OG. And here is the eternal optimist, Steve.
When we get outside, when we get to the horses, just remember one thing. Hey, wait a minute. What? You didn't see LeFors out there, did you? LeFors? No. Oh, good. For a moment there, I thought we were in trouble.
Dude, I get so emotional in that scene at the end because his defiance at the end, he's still joking, but like he knows he's going to die. And by saying that thing about LeFors, he's going to die with his head held high.
Exactly.
And it always moves me, man. This scene always moves me between them because you know what's coming, you know?
Any thoughts on the one thing they were supposed to remember?
You know what? I've never thought about it. I've never sat and wondered what it was. Do you have
no? Every time I see the movie, I'm like, it's like one of those like there's there's the scene in The Breakfast Club where Bender is climbing through the rafters, telling a joke to himself, and he never gets to the end of the joke.
That's right. He falls through.
Yeah. And this is the same thing where it's like, just remember one thing. One thing were you supposed to remember what was on Butch's mind, and you never get to it. And yes, I agree. For a second there, I thought we were in trouble when we just saw that whole army show up. And we know, and of course they know they're going to die. But I think they're like, there's always hope. You know what I mean? Like, I still think there's some, like, maybe we're going to find our way to get out of it. We got out of the super posse. We got to, we maybe we can get out. And we all know, no way. You're not. There's an entire army there.
I'm an old rebel. I'm an aging rebel, Steve. And these
some might say an outlaw.
Some might say an outlaw. I mean, people ask me all the time why I took that name. And this is why movies like this, like, I loved the outlaws in movies, man. I really did. And in the TV shows, the ones that had, like, you could understand why they became the things that they became. And they're always fighting the establishment. I've always been someone who's fought the establishment. And so to me, when I see these movies now as an aging old rebel who's had to, become a part of the establishment at times, it always breaks my heart, because in a lot of ways, I think it would have been better for me to go out when I was younger. But certainly I'm enjoying my time now as an older man with my lady and doing shows like this with you and finding a second kind of home and doing this stuff. But there's still that old rebel inside, man. And so when I see these moments, I get super emotional, remembering, that to fight to the end, to fight in service of something, and yes, you can say, oh, these are outlaws or these are criminals, whatever, but there was a way of life they were fighting for throughout the whole movie. And this final moment is them giving their lives to in essence, defend that way of life or protect that way of life,
I don't know if I've ever thought of it as like giving their lives or protecting it's just them being who they are until their final moment, them never, and certainly never quitting, they might bitch and they might argue and they might, make mistakes and do stupid things, and they just are going to keep being Butch and Sundance.
Yeah. Yeah. But they've symbolized the Old West. And in a way, all those soldiers, all those guns are killing the Old West for modernization. And it's very similar to what happens in Young Guns, which I wonder if the end of Young Guns is influenced by the end of Butch Cassidy.
Totally.
Because when they pull out that machine gun or howitzer, whatever the thing is called, man, that gets me emotional every time. As you see Terry O'Quinn get shot by that thing and die, Anyway, we've been talking about the moment. Let's get to the moment. Steve, as they run out, we hear the captain of the army yell, "Fuego, fuego," in essence, fire, fire, fire. And the film stops in a freeze frame as we hear the bullets ring out, essentially implying that they heroically died in a hail of gunfire, and the freeze frame slowly fades into sepia tone just as we began the movie, and the score kicks in quietly after a little while. And that is the end of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in real life, possibly, and of course, the end of the movie.
I've spent a lot of time scrolling back and forth in film or video to try to find the right freeze frame. I've always used freeze frames. I like freeze frames. I like freeze frames in movies. I've used them a lot in films that I've done, and you'll spend a lot of time trying to find just the right one. Mm-hmm. This is one of the great ones of all time.
Yeah.
The magic of this freeze frame is, even though it's still, it has movement in it.
Yeah.
It still feels filled with energy and excitement and movement. And the combination filmically of watching the freeze frame and hearing their deaths. We don't see their deaths.
Right.
So what it does is that it makes you imagine somewhat visually what's actually happening to them after the film has frozen.
Yeah.
But in our minds, the scene is continuing. And then this pullback as we go to sepia and then we pull back. And it's like, the only way they could do that, it's like those shots that we talked about in their little trip to New York and all the stills, is that this is a composite shot of us, because there's no lensing that could do this, that could be that close on that freeze frame and pull all the way back. It's not possible. Right. So they had to composite all this in. It never occurred to me until watching it this time. It has to be a composite, and it is seamless, perfectly executed. Yeah, it's again, what this is. I don't know if I say this is one of the top 10 endings of films, but this is in that conversation of greatest final moments in any film ever.
Oh, that's an excellent point. And I also think it honors the film because, look, this is 1969. The Wild Bunch comes out this year. And his ending, Peckinpah's ending, is bloody and gory, trying to destroy the illusions and myths of the West, right? His approach was to go this way. For all George Roy Hill's bluster and strong-arming and knowing what he wanted, battling with Newman at times in the film, because he was very clear, I know what I'm doing, I know what I want, stop arguing with me, it's going to work. He wanted to lionize and canonize Butch Cassidy and Sundance, which is why we don't see them die. And by putting them in the freeze frame and going into sepia tone, he's in essence saying, you got a window to see what their world was like, and now we're closing that window, but you're not going to see them die because we're going to keep them as beautiful as they were when you saw them in the film, and that's what we want you to remember, that they were amazing in this way. So two different approaches, because Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid is also a film that like kind of tries to destroy these myths about the West and the John Wayne myths about the West, which I love those films, but open to seeing different interpretations of Westerns. Whereas Peckinpah's is a much more brutal showing you of what the end of Dying in the West was like, you know. So I think both of those films accomplish it in two completely different ways, and they both work, you know, which I love.
I think, and I think you kind of are saying this too, is like ending on the freeze frame. Butch and Sundance live forever.
Live forever, 100%.
Yeah.
There were reports that mirrored what we saw in the movie, that on November 6th of 1908, Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid stole payroll from a mining company, courier in San Vicente, Bolivia. A few days later, the cavalry surrounded the house where they were staying. Apparently, a subsequent shootout left a man believed to be Sundance injured. That evening, soldiers heard 2 shots coming from inside the house, and they claimed to have found the 2 men dead with bullet wounds in the head, essentially implying that they killed themselves rather than face the fire of the cavalry. But I still think that applies, that they went their own route, how they wanted to die. And they were apparently buried in a nearby, quote unquote, Indian cemetery. But when news filtered back to the States that Cassidy and Sundance had been killed, none of their friends seemed to have particularly believed the story. In fact, sightings of Butch Cassidy began almost immediately. Butch Cassidy's nephew, Bill Bentonson, wrote a book, Butch Cassidy, My Uncle, that points to around 20 well-documented sightings of Cassidy after 1908, including in 1925, when he was found driving a shiny new Ford and sporting that, quote, characteristic Parker grin. He was said to have visited his family in Utah, and his sister, Lula Parker Bentonson, who, by the way, did promotional videos for this particular movie, claimed he told the family of his exploits and kept in touch with them until his alleged real death in 1937. And apparently it is a well-held family secret where he is buried and under what false name he is buried in the United States. So either believe he died in a hail of gunfire or believe he snuck back into the States and went incognito for the rest of his life, except to his family, maybe a couple other people, and then died by his own way in 1937 there. Either way, I think it's a great ending for Butch Cassidy.
I wonder if part of that is like the origin of and I saw Bruce Lee at a convenience store, and Elvis is still living somewhere, and like these people, this idea that there's certain characters in our history where they're so powerful that we can't accept that they're gone.
Yeah,
you know,
very possible.
And maybe Butch Cassidy's in that category
for sure.
And this brings us to a question from Wayne Edwards, who says, this was the movie I watched over and over on the weekend matinees on Channel 11 when I was a kid. And this is where I was first exposed to Robert Redford. I've been a fan ever since. I do have a question about the ending. Did Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, to a degree, copy this ending?
No. As I said, I think both films ended differently because we see all of the Wild Bunch die at the end of The Wild Bunch in sad and brutal ways. In this way, they die heroically in Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. They die heroically differently in The Wild Bunch. It's more cynical. The Wild Bunch is more cynical, whereas I think Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid is more hopeful. Because in The Wild Bunch, it's very clear that the establishment, you can't win, right? Whereas with Butch Cassidy and Sundance, the end is you can go out your way, even if you can't win.
Right.
And so I think that's the difference between the two of them.
So I can't comment on this because I have never seen the ending of The Wild Bunch.
What?
I have seen half The Wild Bunch. Here there was like a revival movie, you know, I think it might have been at the Cinerama Dome or at the Chinese in the mid 90s, I think. And I went with a friend who had a panic attack halfway through the movie.
Oh no.
And we had to leave. And I've seen half of The Wild Bunch. I've never seen the second half of the film.
Might be time to add that to the list.
At some point, we'll have to do that. And we have another question. If you remember, Matt Grieber asked his joking question about the beauty of our stars. Yes. And here is his serious question. He asked, what other movie has had such a dark ending that still is seen as a good time? Bonnie and Clyde essentially has the same ending, but is dark as hell.
No, Bonnie and Clyde, you see them get shot up to pieces. So to me, that's a darker ending.
Well, and I think the key to his question is an ending that is so tragic, but the whole movie is totally fun. Like, are there other movies that fall into that category?
Ooh, that's a great question. But I have to reject the premise of the question. I don't think the ending is dark. I think the ending is defiant and strong and powerful and sends a message that you must always fight the establishment. That's the way I read it. I don't think it's dark at all. Wild Bunch ending, that is freaking dark. But
Yeah.
I don't think this one is dark. So because we see them, we don't ever see one bullet hit them. Even when they're hit in the movie, we don't see blood or we don't see anything kind of really devastating between. Maybe there's a little bit of blood spots, but there isn't like this big injury that you're seeing and they're trying to keep their blood inside their body or anything like that. No, they go out defiantly, standing tall, and not hunched over. So I don't think it's a dark ending.
Until Matt said this, I hadn't thought about putting this ending with Bonnie and Clyde, although that makes perfect sense. And I also hadn't thought, because obviously Bonnie and Clyde is so influenced by the French New Wave.
Yeah.
And I think there's a direct connection between the end of Breathless and the end of Bonnie and Clyde, with the criminal getting killed right in front of us. And so it makes perfect sense to make that connection to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But you have criminals getting killed at the end of the movie. That makes perfect sense to make the connection. I've never made that connection either. And I think I feel much more like you, which is, it's not that it's not a sad ending, but I never feel sad at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
I'm not upset. You're right. It's kind of triumphant. It's defiant.
Yeah.
This is how Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid go out, you know?
Yeah. I think I might put Das Boot in the conversation, even though these are Nazis, but you can clearly see these are people who've been forced to do this for the Nazi government in order to exist in the country during that time. And I think that ending is so sad yet powerful, you know? And I might even throw, what's one? I was thinking of one recently just now, but I can't remember. Oh, Birdman. I would say Birdman, right? Because we don't know what happens to him at the end. And Emma Stone looking up as if he's actually sprouted wings, or that's his spirit going to heaven after he's killed himself. But again, he's doing it on his terms. And so there's that's a powerful ending that is uplifting to me. Even though you could argue maybe that it's dark. You know?
The difference, I would say, because this is the other piece of the question, is Das Boot, and I would say Birdman too, they're not fun the way Butch and Sundance are fun.
Fair point. I think Birdman is fun. Like, there's a lot of funny moments with him. So I like him, you know?
Yeah, it's a point. Yeah, I mean, it's like Birdman's totally funny. Well, this is the weird magic of Butch and Sundance, is that we enjoyed them. How many times did we say, I love these guys, I love being with these guys, I love hanging out with these guys, they're so fun, they're so funny. Said that throughout the entire movie, right up until the time they get killed.
I love these guys. So here's some more facts about the movie here. It premieres on September 23rd of 1969. It grosses $82,625 in its opening week from 2 theaters in New York City. The following week, it expanded and became the #1 film in the United States and Canada for 2 weeks. It went on to earn $15 million, and it was the top grossing film released in 1969. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses, because initially the numbers came back and George Roy Hill and William Goldman were worried because the reviews were not that great. But one of William Goldman's friends reached out to him and told him that he had been standing in the rain for an hour for a ticket to the movie. And that picked his spirits up and gave him hope that the film was going to be all right. So this is very much a film that was critic proof, because there were a lot of critics who came for this film and didn't like it. New York Times film reviewer Vincent Canby said, quote, "The film is very funny in a strictly contemporary way, but at the heart of the film, there is a gnawing emptiness that can't be satisfied by an awareness that Hill and Goldman knew exactly what they were doing, making a very slick movie." Time magazine said the 2 film stars were, quote, "afflicted with cinematic schizophrenia. One moment they are sinewy, battered remnants of a discarded tradition. The next, they are low comedians whose chaffing relationship and dialogue could have been lifted from a Batman and Robin episode." Ooh. Steve, woof.
It's just, this is why I think there are great film critics in the world, and I think the art of film criticism is an important thing and valuable. But it's also why I always am curious about the difference between the Rotten Tomatoes critics score and the audience score, is that sometimes people just don't get the movie.
Sometimes
someone who says that, Batman and Robin comic book, they don't get this movie. You didn't get it. It wasn't for you. Sorry.
That's true.
Yeah.
But speaking of famous critics, 2 famous critics who didn't like the movie were Siskel and Ebert. Ebert gave it 2.5 out of 4 stars. He praised the beginning of the film, but said, and its 3 lead actors, but felt the film progressed too slowly and had an unsatisfactory ending. He reaffirmed his review in 1989. He called the film a, quote, turkey and was baffled by its success.
Wow.
Gene Siskel thought it was predictable and the writing, and that it was, quote, too cute to be believed, not memorable. And he went on to say that writing a negative review for this film was his first test as a film critic because he was a massive fan of Paul Newman. He got backlash by a lot of people. A lot of people enjoyed the movie for his criticism, and it really kind of galvanized him as a critic. Like, this was the film that changed him and made it clear that he needed to get tougher if he wanted to be a film critic. So
as we said many times, everybody is allowed to have whatever their experience of a movie is, and
Yes.
if they like it or don't like it. Art is a subjective medium, and in this case, it just so happens that Siskel and Ebert are both entirely wrong.
Yes, absolutely. David Fincher said this is the film that made him want to become a filmmaker, want to become a director, and I think that's high praise. However, John Borman, the director of Excalibur, a film we've done here on the show, hated the film and said this was the beginning of the end of Westerns, that this movie signified the end of Westerns because they were making them too comical. And 1969, there were a lot of Westerns that came out, Steve. We'll get to that in a second. The film was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Story and Screenplay, Best Original Score, Best Song, and Best Sound. It won for Best Song for, of course, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, the Best Score there from Burt Bacharach, Best Cinematography from Conrad Hall, and Best Screenplay for William Goldman. It lost Best Picture and Best Director to Midnight Cowboy and John Schlesinger. But this was a weird year for film because these were the other films that were nominated for Best Picture. Anne of 1,000 Days. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about that film. Hello, Dolly, which to me is an underwhelming musical, directed by the great Gene Kelly, starring the great Barbra Streisand, and Z. These were the films nominated for Best Picture. But here are the films that were not nominated for Best Picture: True Grit, Easy Rider, The Wild Bunch, Downhill Racer, They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, which is one of my quietly favorite Jane Fonda films, and arguably, in some people's minds, one of the best James Bond movies ever made, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So none of those films are nominated for Best Picture in this year, yet all these other films were that no one talks about. So it's a fascinating year in movies.
That is a weird year, and I'm just kind of thinking about, like, well, what do I think should win Best Picture? Midnight Cowboy is a really good movie.
It is.
But I love Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Of the ones you said, like, this is my best picture without question. And the other ones, yeah, that's a weird. Because none of the other ones, although they're interesting films, like Easy Rider is not a movie I like.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're on the same page on that. I don't know if we'll ever do that movie.
Yeah, I've seen it a couple of times, and it's just it is one of those movies. I totally understand why this movie is important. Doesn't do it for me at all. Great stories about it. I mean, it would be an interesting Cine-Files episode because it's so interesting. Yeah. But I don't think we'll ever do it because you and I don't like it. You know,
yeah, would people endure 2 parts of us not liking a movie? I don't know.
No.
But yeah. For me, The Wild Bunch is the best picture for me personally, but certainly Butch Cassidy and Sundance is a close second.
I can only judge the first half of The Wild Bunch.
Fair point. Also, one of the other things about this movie that I think is weird that I discovered in my, or sad that I discovered in my research, is that Paul Newman's uncredited hairdresser on the film was Jay Sebring. And for those of you who know what happened to Jay Sebring, that's a sad situation. He was the top hair designer of the day, and he was one of the people who was murdered along with the actress Sharon Tate by Charles Manson's gang in August of 1969. A month before the film's release. So kind of a bad legacy there. Although he was uncredited in the film, so you don't see his name, but still a connection to Paul Newman.
That's weird. And B, who else have we been talking about through this whole process is Steve McQueen, who was supposed to be there that night. Like there's as soon as you go into that story, there's so many connections. There are all sorts of people that may or may not have been there that night that were invited and didn't show up. And that's the weird smallness of Hollywood, particularly in that era. You know,
yeah. Once you get to a certain level, you're kind of involved in all this stuff, and what does that lead to for you? Where are you invited to that you can't quite make it? You know. All right, so I think that's everything, brother. I know this is a film that's very important to you, so please, you know what? No, because it is very important to you, you should have the final thoughts on this. So I will give my final thoughts now. This was so much fun to revisit again. It has been quite some time since I saw Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And certainly it's probably been a while since I saw it in terms of the Cine-Files. So I went in with a completely different mindset, wondering if it was going to hold up, wondering if I still was going to like it, or if it was going to be dated. Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't some dated moments for sure, but overall, the film itself still carries a hell of an impact. As I said earlier, got me emotional by the end there before we see Butch and Sundance die. Made me fall back in love with Robert Redford as an actor, fall back in love with Paul Newman as an actor, really made me appreciate George Roy Hill and kind of lament the fact that he is not one of these directors that people talk about highly enough when they talk about the great directors of the 60s and 70s. So, because he also did Marathon Man. So this is it's a guy with a lot of credentials. I got to appreciate Conrad Hall's cinematography. I got to fall back in love literally with Katherine Ross and enjoy a lot of Edith Head's costuming throughout the whole movie as well. But the script by William Goldman is really fantastic here. And just, this is a top-notch film that deserves all the praise it still gets and holds up all these years later and is so much fun to watch and revisit. And I hope all of you enjoyed revisiting it with us for sure, because I certainly enjoyed talking with you about it, Steve, because I can tell how much you love the film with every comment you were making throughout our discussion.
You know, it's funny, this year, we've done a lot of great films on the Cine-Files, but we've also done a lot of great films that I didn't know backwards and forwards. You know, I had seen Sexy Beast, I think once. I had seen Ordinary People 30, 40 years ago. Yeah. I'd seen Last Temptation of Christ maybe once or twice. Raging Bull, it's not a movie I watch a lot because I find it really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And so the experience of doing those films that aren't like hard written down in my DNA is different from the experience of coming back to Butch and Sundance. Yeah. So even though you were doing the research and you were running the show, and so you knew the film backwards and forwards much better than I had to, because I didn't have to do that kind of prep.
Yeah.
I still know this movie backwards and forwards because I've seen it so many times and I've watched it so many times throughout my life. Yeah. And so this is the first movie we've done in a while that's an old friend. And there's a very different experience. And in particular, because I feel like Butch and Sundance are my friends. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they're just the way that they hang out. They have such an incredible relationship. Yeah. And I have visited them on their journey so many times. And as you said too, of like sort of how dudes relate to dudes.
Yeah.
There is so much about their bitching and joking and giving each other shit and what they know about each other and what they don't, and the inside jokes, all that stuff. That's like my guy friendships. You know what I mean? And that experience, like particularly with the scene with Harvey and the 1, 2, 3 go and all that stuff, where you can just see that these two guys are perfectly in sync. And so I think like both my feeling of my own friends and my relationship to this movie as an old friend and their relationship with each other as old friends is part of what makes this movie so damn enjoyable to me. And part of why, you know what, maybe it's because Siskel and Ebert are so grumpy with each other that they actually can't relate to what is so great about this film. And the other thing, as you said, it's a master filmmaker with George Roy Hill from the opening scene to the end, knowing exactly what he's doing. It's a master screenplay with William Goldman in his first movie, knowing what not to write. That's like the screenplay is so minimal. It's so slim. It's so clear. And things like I'll go back ahead of you, those kinds of, or I won't watch you die, those little things, or them being dumb when they're coming down the hill and don't have the money. All those little things about how to put a movie together work so well. And the fact that this is a Western with my favorite gunslinger that has probably less than 3 minutes of total action in the entire film. You know, yes, they're running for the Super Posse, but in terms of training, it's not a lot there. It is entirely the performances and the characters of Robert Redford and Paul Newman and their relationship. And what's incredible about it too, as you said, these guys just met, and yet they will be paired together throughout the history of cinema for 2 movies, for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the next film we're handling on the Cine-Files, which is The Sting. And so forever, we will think about Redford and Newman together.
Or Newman and Redford.
Redford and Newman. It's Morris and Rocha.
I think it's Rocha and Morris,
well,
but all right.
Clearly alphabetical. All right, so we get to the end of the Cine-File. So that is what we think about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Obviously, this is a movie that holds a very special place for both John and I. I was absolutely thrilled, John, to have you lead us through it. That was fantastic. I love sitting on this other side, and I know we're going to be doing this more in the future. But I'm also excited. I've already started prepping for our next film, which is The Sting. And boy, there's going to be just as much to say about that one as there is this one. But right now, we'd love to hear your thoughts about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You can visit us on our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files. It's Cine_Files on Twitter, the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. You could support the show. And as we said, join our advisory board for our next conversation at patreon.com/the Cine-Files. You can also get ad-free versions of the show, listen to our watch-alongs, ask questions, some of which you heard during this episode, and your questions can also appear in an episode. And of course, you can also get our shorts and ad-free versions of the show at Apple Podcasts, where we would love to get your reviews. We got some fantastic reviews lately, which we very, very much appreciate. You can buy or stream Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids and every other movie we've ever reviewed at cinephiles.net. And I'm at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how would people find you?
You can always find me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says, and all my other podcasts, the Geek Buddies and the Hot Mic that are out there for you all to enjoy, and the Outlaw Nation podcast feed, which has now started adding the Star Wars show and the wrestling show back into the feed. And I will be doing more standalone episodes of The Nation and my own stuff there on that feed as well. So go and resubscribe or subscribe to that as well.
And I think that is it for this week. We will be continuing our deep dive into the world of Robert Redford and Paul Newman, or Paul Newman and Robert Redford, with George Roy Hill on the incredible con movie, The Sting. We'll see you then.